Raymond Whitaker's arthritic fingers froze on the dog's collar, the engraved metal tag cutting into his palm. The German Shepherd, his German Shepherd, watched him with amber eyes that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else. "Sir, I need Ranger back. Without him, I won't make it through another night." The young man's voice cracked over the phone, unleashing an avalanche of implications. Mrs. Patterson next door dropped her watering can with a hollow clatter, sensing the shift in Raymond's posture even from across the yard. The neighborhood had just started calling him the Dog Man instead of the Widower. 3 years after placing Eleanor's wedding ring in a velvet box, Raymond had finally found something worth waking up for each morning. The adoption papers still sat on his kitchen counter, ink barely dry. "Please," the stranger begged. "He's the only thing keeping me alive." Who owned a soul? And what price would Raymond pay to keep his only companion? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millfield, Virginia had been Raymond Whitaker's home for all his 67 years, except for the brief stint at college where he'd met Eleanor. Once a thriving community built around the lumber mill, it now suffered the slow decay of many small American towns. Storefronts with "for lease" signs, young people migrating to cities, and property taxes rising as retirees on fixed incomes struggled to hold on to family homes. Raymond's 2-story colonial on Maple Street had once bustled with the sounds of students coming over for extra tutoring, his wife's piano playing, and holiday gatherings for teachers who had nowhere else to go. Now the rooms echoed with emptiness, particularly since Eleanor had passed 3 years ago. Cancer, he told everyone. A simpler explanation than the truth. As the former principal of Millfield High for 28 years, Raymond had shaped generations of young minds. Students still greeted him respectfully at the grocery store, though fewer recognized him these days. His daughter Sarah, a successful attorney in Chicago, called dutifully every Sunday and visited on major holidays. Her promises to move closer someday rang increasingly hollow as her career advanced. The loneliness had settled into his bones like the arthritis that plagued his hands, a constant companion that medication could dull but never eliminate. The evenings stretched longest. He'd find himself talking to Eleanor's photograph, the silence afterward more profound than any response could have been. It was Sarah who'd finally convinced him to visit the Riverdale Animal Rescue Center. Just to look, she'd insisted during their weekly call. Animals lower blood pressure. There are studies. Raymond had gone reluctantly, expecting the noise and chaos of desperate animals to amplify his sense of isolation. Instead, in the third kennel from the end, he'd found silence. A German Shepherd sat perfectly still, watching him with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate rather than plead. "That Storm," Lisa Welch, the young volunteer, had explained, "just came in last week. Former owner couldn't keep him anymore. He's incredibly well trained, almost like a service dog." Something in the animal's dignified bearing reminded Raymond of himself, a creature displaced from purpose, waiting for direction. When Raymond knelt, despite protesting knees, the dog approached carefully, offering a respectful distance before gently placing his muzzle in Raymond's outstretched palm. "We've had several inquiries," Lisa mentioned, "but he seems particular about people." "I'll take him," Raymond had said, surprising himself with the immediacy of his decision. The past 3 weeks had transformed his empty house into a home again. Storm accompanied him on slow morning walks, waited patiently during Raymond's afternoon naps, and performed the nightly ritual of checking all doors and windows before settling at the foot of Raymond's bed. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Raymond had adjusted his schedule to accommodate another living being's needs. He found himself waking earlier, walking farther, and even reducing his pain medication as regular movement loosened his stiff joints. "You're good medicine," he often told Storm during their walks through the neighborhood, earning curious glances from neighbors unused to seeing the former principal smiling. Raymond had just settled into his armchair with the crossword puzzle when Storm's head suddenly lifted, ears alert and focused on the front door. Moments later, the doorbell rang. "You heard that before it happened, didn't you?" Raymond murmured, setting aside his reading glasses. Storm was already at the door, but instead of his usual protective stance, slightly forward, ears erect, the dog's tail began a hesitant wag. Curious, Raymond opened the door to find a young man standing on his porch. The stranger couldn't have been more than 35, with military short hair and the hard, lean build of someone who'd spent time in difficult places. His eyes, a startling blue against sun-weathered skin, darted nervously from Raymond to the German shepherd now pressing eagerly against the screen door. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you," the man began, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Virginia's rural counties. "My name is Caleb Harrington. I believe you recently adopted a dog from Riverdale Rescue Center." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "My dog." Raymond's hand instinctively tightened on the door frame. "I have the adoption papers. Everything's legal and proper." "Yes, sir, I know that." Caleb's gaze dropped momentarily, then returned with renewed intensity. "I'm the one who surrendered him. I made a terrible mistake, and I've come to fix it." Storm, or whatever his previous name had been, was now whining softly, pawing at the screen door that separated him from the visitor. Raymond had never seen his normally dignified companion so animated. "May I?" Caleb gestured toward Storm. Against his better judgment, Raymond opened the screen door. The reaction was immediate and undeniable. Storm bounded forward, circling Caleb with barely contained excitement, licking his hands and pressing against his legs. "Hey, Ranger," Caleb whispered, dropping to one knee to embrace the dog. "I missed you too, buddy." "Ranger?" Raymond asked, watching their reunion with a growing sense of unease. "That's his name. At least, that's what I called him." Caleb looked up, still stroking the dog's ears. "What do you call him?" "Storm?" Raymond felt oddly defensive, saying it aloud. "The shelter had him listed as Storm." "That suits him, too." Caleb nodded, a sad smile crossing his features. "He's like shelter in a storm." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Storm's, or Ranger's, contented panting as he pressed against his former owner's leg. "Perhaps you'd better come in and explain," Raymond finally offered, stepping back from the doorway. His principal's instinct for difficult conversations told him this would not be a quick exchange. Once seated in Raymond's living room, Caleb seemed to struggle with where to begin. Storm had settled with his head on Caleb's boot, eyes fixed adoringly on the young man's face. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marines," Caleb finally began. "Came home in 2018 with a Purple Heart and what the VA calls service-related PTSD. In English, that means I can't sleep, can't hold down regular work, and sometimes I'm back in Kandahar even when I'm standing in a Virginia supermarket." Raymond nodded, saying nothing. He'd seen this before in former students who'd returned from various conflicts. "Ranger came to me as a puppy through a veterans support program," Caleb continued, his fingers absently stroking Storm's ear. "Not an official service dog. Those cost thousands and have waiting lists years long. But a companion animal. I trained him myself using resources for vets with PTSD. He's exceptionally well trained," Raymond acknowledged. "He saved my life," Caleb said simply. "When things get bad, when the memories hit too hard, he knows. He'll press against me, lick my face, even stand on my chest if I'm having an episode." Pulls me back to Virginia. To now. Raymond felt the first twinge of what would become a much larger dilemma. "Then why did you surrender him to the shelter?" Caleb's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, I lost my apartment. Couldn't make rent after my job at the warehouse ended. VA benefits barely cover food. I moved into a motel that doesn't allow pets, thinking it would just be for a week or two." His voice cracked slightly. Weeks turned into a month. I kept Ranger in my truck during the day, snuck him into the room at night. It wasn't fair to him. Raymond remembered his own financial struggles after college, before his teaching career stabilized, the helplessness of watching bills accumulate while opportunities dwindled. My friend was going to take him temporarily, but his landlord threatened eviction. I thought, Caleb paused, visibly collecting himself. I thought I was doing right by Ranger, giving him a chance at a stable home. The shelter promised they'd find him a good family. And they did, Raymond said, more firmly than he intended. Caleb nodded quickly. Yes, sir, they did. I can see that. He looks healthy, happy. But you still want him back? It wasn't a question. I finally got back on my feet, found work with a construction crew, and rented a small house outside town. It has a fenced yard. Caleb leaned forward, eyes intense. My therapist at the VA says giving up Ranger was a major setback for my treatment. He's not just a pet, sir. He's... Caleb struggled to find the words. Your lifeline, Raymond finished for him, recalling the desperate words from their phone conversation. Yes, sir. Exactly that. Raymond felt the weight of the situation settling fully on his shoulders. In just 3 weeks, Storm had become essential to his own well-being, too. The dog gave him purpose, routine, companionship. The thought of his house returning to silence made his chest tighten. I understand your situation, Mr. Harrington. Caleb, please. Caleb, Raymond corrected himself. But I've legally adopted Storm, Ranger, and we've formed our own bond. I'm not willing to simply hand him over. To his credit, Caleb didn't argue or show anger. Instead, he nodded slowly, a look of resigned understanding on his face. I respect that, sir. I do. He looked down at the dog, who gazed back with complete devotion. I just had to try. The young man's quiet dignity in the face of disappointment struck Raymond. It reminded him of countless parent conferences where tough decisions had to be communicated with compassion. Leave me your contact information, Raymond suggested. This is a lot to process. Perhaps we can talk again after I've had some time to think. Hope flickered briefly in Caleb's eyes. That would be more than fair, sir. As they exchanged phone numbers, Raymond noticed Caleb's hands, calloused from manual labor but trembling slightly. Not from age, as Raymond's often did, but from something else entirely. The symptoms of trauma weren't always visible, but Raymond had been an educator long enough to recognize suffering when he saw it. After Caleb left, Storm sat by the window, watching his former owner's truck until it disappeared down Maple Street. For the first time since the adoption, the dog seemed restless, moving between the window and the door with occasional soft whines. I know, Raymond told him, running a hand along Storm's back. Life gets complicated. That evening, Raymond called his daughter. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the precise, clipped tones she used during her workday. Dad? Everything okay? You never call on Thursdays? Raymond explained the situation as concisely as possible, ending with, What would you do? Sarah's response was immediate and lawyerly. Nothing. You have legal ownership. The surrender was voluntary. He has no claim. That's not what I asked, Sarah. A sigh filtered through the phone. Fine. I'd check him out thoroughly before even considering any arrangement. Let me run a background check. What was his name again? Caleb Harrington, former Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I'll see what I can find. But Dad, please don't do anything rash. Storm has been so good for you. After hanging up, Raymond sat in his armchair, watching Storm finally settle on his bed in the corner. The dog still seemed subdued, his usual alertness replaced by something like melancholy. "What should I do, Eleanor?" Raymond asked aloud, looking at his wife's photograph on the mantel. She had always been his moral compass, guiding him through the complex ethical dilemmas that came with running a school. The photograph offered no answer, but as if in response, Storm rose from his bed and came to rest his head on Raymond's knee. The gesture, so simple and trusting, brought unexpected tears to the old principal's eyes. "Whatever happens," he promised the dog, "I'll make sure you're taken care of. That's what Eleanor would say is right." In the morning, Raymond called Lisa at the rescue center requesting more information about Storm's surrender. Her response confirmed Caleb's story, but added new complexity. "He was definitely distraught when he brought the dog in," Lisa explained. "Said he couldn't afford to keep him anymore and needed to move somewhere that didn't allow pets. He stayed for almost an hour, just sitting with the dog. It was pretty heartbreaking." "Did he mention anything about the dog being a support animal for PTSD?" Raymond asked. "No, nothing like that. If he had, we might have directed him to resources that could have helped. We have programs specifically for veterans." Raymond thanked her and hung up, more confused than before. Why wouldn't Caleb have mentioned the dog's crucial role in his mental health when surrendering him? It was an odd omission that Raymond couldn't quite reconcile with the desperate man who had stood on his porch. The mystery deepened when Sarah called back that afternoon. "Dad, I found some concerning information about your visitor," she began without preamble. "Caleb Harrington does check out as a Marine veteran with an honorable discharge. But there's also a restraining order filed against him last year by an Amy Harrington, presumably his ex-wife." Raymond felt a chill. "On what grounds?" "The records are partially sealed, but the public portion mentions erratic behavior and threats. Dad, I really think you should be careful about any further contact with this person." After thanking Sarah for her research, Raymond sat with this new information, trying to reconcile it with the respectful, soft-spoken young man who had visited his home. Combat veterans often struggled with civilian life. Raymond had seen it in too many former students. But a restraining order suggested something more concerning. Unable to settle his thoughts, Raymond turned to his computer. Though not particularly tech-savvy, he had learned enough from years of administrative work to conduct basic research. A search for Caleb Harrington's name yielded little until Raymond added Afghanistan veteran and Virginia. There, on a local news website dated 18 months earlier, was a small article about returning veterans struggling with housing insecurity. A photograph showed Caleb standing beside a truck very similar to the one he'd driven to Raymond's house. The caption identified him as a Marine who had served in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Further searching led Raymond to a social media profile that appeared to belong to Caleb. Most recent posts were public: photos of a construction site, some patriotic memes, and several older pictures of Caleb with Storm Ranger. In one image, captioned "My Battle Buddy," Caleb knelt beside the German Shepherd, both looking directly at the camera with similar expressions of alert watchfulness. But it was an older post that caught Raymond's attention and sent a ripple of unease through him. Dated nearly 2 years ago, it showed Ranger wearing what appeared to be a specialized harness. The caption read, "Training Day, Ranger Learning Protection Protocols, My Four-Legged Weapon Against the Darkness." The word weapon lingered in Raymond's mind, taking on troubling dimensions when combined with Sarah's discovery of the restraining order. What exactly had Caleb trained this dog to do? And what did he really intend now that he wanted Ranger back? The evening after his unsettling discovery, Raymond's phone rang just as he was preparing Storm's dinner. The dog's ears perked up at the familiar ringtone. "Mr. Whitaker?" Caleb's voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I was wondering if you'd had time to think about our situation." Raymond chose his words carefully. "I have been considering it, yes. I've also been doing some research." A pause. "Research?" About you, about your history with Ranger." Raymond kept his tone neutral, the same voice he'd used with countless troubled students in his office. "I found some concerning things, Caleb. A restraining order. Posts about training Ranger as a weapon." The silence stretched so long that Raymond wondered if Caleb had hung up. Finally, the young man spoke, his voice tight. "I understand how that looks, sir. I do, but there's context missing." "I'm listening," Raymond said, watching Storm's attentive face. The dog seemed to recognize Caleb's voice even through the phone. "The restraining order was during my worst period. After my friend Max died in Afghanistan, I wasn't handling civilian life well. Amy tried to help, but I was angry all the time. Never hit her, never would. But I'd wake up screaming, put holes in walls." Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "She did what she had to do to feel safe. I don't blame her." Raymond sat down slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his knees. "And the weapon comment? That's what my therapist called Ranger, a weapon against my PTSD. The protection protocols were for me, not against others. Ranger is trained to recognize signs of an episode and interrupt it, to protect me from myself." A heavy breath filtered through the line. "I know how it sounds. I know I'm asking a lot. But could I just see him once more, say a proper goodbye?" "In public, wherever you feel comfortable." Against his better judgment, and what Sarah would certainly advise, Raymond found himself considering the request. There was something in Caleb's voice that resonated with his own grief, his own loneliness. "The park by the old mill, tomorrow at noon," Raymond finally said. "I'll bring Storm." "Thank you, sir. Thank you." After hanging up, Raymond dialed another number. "Thomas, it's Ray Whitaker. I need a favor." Thomas Parker had been Millfield's police chief before retiring 3 years ago. He and Raymond had worked together through decades of small-town issues, from teenage vandalism to the more serious problems that occasionally touched even their quiet community. "Need backup?" Thomas asked after Raymond explained the situation. "Just an extra set of eyes. I don't think he's dangerous, but better safe than sorry." "I'll be there, keeping my distance unless needed." The next morning, Raymond took Storm to the veterinary clinic for a routine checkup he'd scheduled the previous week. As Dr. Martinez examined the dog, Raymond asked casually, "Could you check if he has a microchip? I'm curious if the shelter properly transferred ownership." "Let me scan him," Dr. Martinez said, running a handheld device over Storm's shoulders and neck. After a moment, the device beeped. "Yes, he's chipped. Registered to Caleb Harrington of Millfield, Virginia." Raymond felt a twinge of unease. "Can that be updated?" "Certainly. Do you have your adoption paperwork?" After producing the necessary documents, Raymond watched as Dr. Martinez updated the registry. "Now he's officially yours in the system, Mr. Whitaker." "Thank you. And could you check something else for me? Has Storm ever had any injuries that might suggest abuse?" The vet's eyebrows rose slightly, but she conducted a thorough examination. "There's some scarring on his left flank," she noted, parting the fur to reveal a healed wound. "Could be from barbed wire or a similar traumatic injury. It's well healed, though. Several years old, I'd guess." Raymond nodded, filing away this information as another piece of the complex puzzle that was Storm's, or Ranger's, history. At precisely noon, Raymond arrived at the park with Storm on his leash. The old mill's water wheel creaked in the background, a familiar sound from his childhood that had outlasted most other constants in Millfield. Storm seemed unusually alert, scanning the area with focused attention. From a bench near the parking area, Thomas gave a subtle nod. Dressed in casual clothes rather than his former uniform, he looked like any other retiree enjoying the spring weather, but Raymond knew his friend still carried the service weapon he was licensed for. Caleb's truck pulled into the lot 5 minutes later. As soon as the young veteran stepped out, Storm's demeanor changed completely. The dog began pulling on the leash, whining with excitement. Raymond had to tighten his grip to prevent Storm from bolting toward his former owner. "Easy, boy," Raymond murmured, though he couldn't help feeling a pang at the dog's obvious recognition and joy. Caleb approached slowly, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, clearly making an effort to appear respectable. His eyes, however, were fixed on Storm, a mixture of happiness and pain evident in his expression. "Thank you for coming," Caleb said, finally looking at Raymond. "And for letting me see him again." Raymond nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. "He clearly remembers you." "May I?" Caleb gestured toward Storm, who was straining against the leash. After a moment's hesitation, Raymond handed over the leash. "We'll stay here in the open." The reunion that followed was undeniable in its emotional power. Storm, or Ranger, practically leaped into Caleb's arms, licking his face and pressing against him with complete devotion. Caleb knelt in the grass, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the thick fur. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much. I'm so sorry." Raymond stood awkwardly to the side, feeling simultaneously like an intruder on a private moment and a guardian protecting his own interests. He glanced toward Thomas, who remained alert but calm on his bench. After a few minutes, Caleb regained his composure and stood, though he kept one hand on Storm's head. "He looks good. Healthy." "You've taken excellent care of him. He's been easy to care for," Raymond acknowledged. "Very well trained, as you said." Caleb nodded, pride briefly replacing the sadness in his eyes. "We worked hard together. Ranger was always smart, picked things up fast." An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the water wheel and Storm's contented panting as he pressed against Caleb's leg. "May I ask you something, Caleb?" Raymond finally said. "Yes, sir. Anything." "Why didn't you tell the shelter that Ranger was a support animal for your PTSD? They have programs that might have helped you keep him." Caleb's expression clouded. "I was ashamed, I guess. Admitting I couldn't take care of him was bad enough. Admitting I couldn't take care of myself without him." He shook his head. "Plus, he's not officially certified. I couldn't afford the formal training programs. Everything I taught him came from online resources and a friend who works with police dogs." The answer rang true to Raymond, who had seen similar pride in struggling students unwilling to accept help. "There's something else," Raymond ventured. "My daughter found a restraining order filed against you." Caleb's shoulders tensed, but he didn't become defensive. "Amy had every right. After my second tour, I came back different, angry. Scared all the time, but hiding it behind anger. She tried to help, but—" He swallowed hard. "One night, I had a flashback, thought I was back in Helmand. Barricaded us in the house, convinced insurgents were outside. Scared her half to death." Raymond nodded slowly, seeing the scenario play out in his mind. "That's when she filed?" "She had to. I wouldn't get help. Thought I could handle it myself." Caleb looked down at Storm, who gazed back with complete trust. "Ranger came a few months later, part of a veteran support initiative. Changed everything. When I start to spiral, he brings me back, grounds me." The genuine emotion in Caleb's voice was impossible to dismiss. Raymond found himself believing the young man despite his initial suspicions. "I don't know what the right answer is here," Raymond admitted. "I've grown attached to Storm myself. He's been—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound overly sentimental. "A lifeline," Caleb supplied, echoing their earlier conversation. "I understand, sir. I do. That's why this is so hard." Raymond made a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you show me where you're living now? I'd like to see where Ranger would be if if we find a solution." Caleb's expression brightened with cautious hope. "Of course. It's not much, but it's clean and secure. About 15 minutes from here." Raymond glanced toward Thomas, who had been watching the interaction carefully. The former police chief raised an eyebrow in question. "My friend will follow us," Raymond explained, gesturing toward Thomas. "Hope you understand the precaution?" "Completely reasonable," Caleb agreed without hesitation. "I'd do the same in your position." The drive to Caleb's home took them to the outskirts of Millfield, where modest houses sat on larger lots, many dating back to the town's more prosperous days. Caleb's rental was a small ranch-style home with peeling white paint but a neatly maintained yard. A chain-link fence enclosed the backyard, clearly a recent addition, as the metal still shone in the sunlight. "Put the fence in myself," Caleb explained as they parked. "Landlord took $50 off the rent in exchange for the improvement." Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but meticulously clean. A worn couch faced an old television, a small dining table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, and the kitchen, while dated, gleamed with recent scrubbing. What caught Raymond's attention most, however, were the items clearly meant for Ranger: a large dog bed in the living room corner, toys neatly stored in a basket, and a set of food and water bowls in the kitchen. "You've been preparing for him," Raymond observed. Caleb nodded, a flush rising to his face. "Hoping, I guess, even if it was just a chance to visit sometimes." Storm, or Ranger, moved through the house with familiar ease, investigating each room before returning to Caleb's side, tail wagging contentedly. "He knows this place," Raymond said, stating the obvious. "We lived here before. Different landlord then. I lost it when I couldn't make rent, but when it came available again—" Caleb shrugged. "Seemed like a good sign." Thomas had followed them inside and was conducting his own subtle assessment, decades of police work evident in his careful observations. After a complete tour, including the fenced backyard, he gave Raymond a small nod, an all-clear signal from their years of working together. "Thank you for showing us your home," Raymond said formally, the principal in him emerging. "It gives me a better understanding of the situation." Caleb led them back to the living room, where Storm had settled naturally on the dog bed in the corner. The sight of the German Shepherd, so obviously comfortable in this space, created a complex knot of emotions in Raymond's chest. "Mr. Whitaker," Caleb began hesitantly, "I know this is an impossible situation. I surrendered Ranger legally. You adopted him legally. You've given him a good home." He took a deep breath. "But I need to be completely honest with you about why I'm asking for another chance." Raymond sat on the edge of the couch, sensing a significant revelation coming. Thomas remained standing near the door, present but unobtrusive. "The VA has been cutting back my therapy sessions. Budget issues, they say. Without Ranger, I've been struggling." Caleb's hands twisted together. "My medication runs out in 30 days and there's a 3-month waiting list for my psychiatrist. Without Ranger's support during that gap." He left the implication hanging in the air. The gravity of the situation settled fully on Raymond's shoulders. This wasn't simply about pet ownership or emotional attachment. For Caleb, it could be a matter of survival. "I have a question," Raymond said, his tone gentle but direct. "And I need absolute honesty, Caleb. When you trained Ranger as your weapon against the darkness, was there ever any aggressive training involved? Anything that could make him dangerous?" Caleb's head snapped up, genuine shock on his face. "No, sir, never. Ranger was trained to interrupt anxiety attacks, provide deep pressure therapy, and guide me to exits if spaces become overwhelming. He's trained to protect me from my own mind, not to harm others." The sincerity in Caleb's response was palpable. Raymond glanced at Thomas, who gave another subtle nod. The veteran police officer detected no deception either. "I see," Raymond said simply. As they prepared to leave, Storm remained on the dog bed, looking between Caleb and Raymond with evident confusion. The dog's divided loyalty was painfully apparent, creating a visual representation of the dilemma they all faced. "Come, Storm," Raymond finally called, using the name he'd given the dog. After a moment's hesitation, the German shepherd rose and moved to Raymond's side, though his eyes remained fixed on Caleb. "He's a good boy," Caleb said softly. "Always follows commands, even when it's hard." Outside, Thomas pulled Raymond aside while Caleb said a last goodbye to Storm by the truck. "What are you thinking, Ray?" the former police chief asked. Raymond watched Caleb kneeling beside Storm, their foreheads pressed together in a moment of connection that transcended words. "I'm thinking there might be a third option beyond keeping him or giving him up," Raymond replied slowly. "Something that serves everyone's needs." "Shared custody?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "For a dog? Is it really so different from the arrangements people make for children?" Raymond countered. "Storm, or Ranger, clearly loves both of us, and we both need him for different reasons." Thomas looked skeptical. "It's unusual. Could get complicated." "Life is complicated, Tom." Raymond's gaze drifted to Caleb, who was now standing with military straightness beside his truck, fighting visible emotion as they prepared to leave with Storm. Sometimes the unconventional solution is the right one. On the drive home, with Storm sleeping peacefully in the back seat, Raymond found his mind returning to Eleanor. She had always been the compassionate one, finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. What would she advise in this situation? The answer came to him in her voice so clear he almost looked to the passenger seat. "Ray, when did doing the right thing ever follow a rule book?" By the time he arrived home, Raymond had made his decision. It would require trust, flexibility, and likely some disapproval from Sarah. But as he watched Storm circle his living room with restless energy, continuously returning to the window that faced the direction of Caleb's house, Raymond knew what needed to be done. He picked up the phone and dialed Caleb's number. "I'd like to propose an arrangement," he said when the young veteran answered. "Not a perfect solution, perhaps, but one that might work for all three of us." "A what?" Sarah's voice rose sharply over the phone. "A custody arrangement? For a dog? Dad, you can't be serious." Raymond held the phone slightly away from his ear, wincing at his daughter's volume. Storm, or Ranger as he was learning to think of him interchangeably, raised his head from his bed, ears perked with interest at Sarah's audible agitation. "I am entirely serious," Raymond replied with the calm firmness that had served him through decades of parent-teacher conferences. "Caleb needs this dog for his health, perhaps even his survival, and I've grown attached to him too." "It's been less than a month, Dad, and this Caleb person has a restraining order against him. Have you lost your mind?" Raymond sighed, rubbing his temple where a headache was forming. "The restraining order was filed during a mental health crisis. He's in treatment now, working, maintaining a home. People deserve second chances, Sarah. I spent my entire career on that principle." "People, yes. But risking your safety, your peace of mind? You don't know this man." "I know enough," Raymond countered. Thomas checked him out thoroughly and found nothing concerning beyond the restraining order, which was never violated. "His military record is exemplary. 2 Purple Hearts, Sarah." The silence that followed told Raymond his daughter was regrouping, preparing her next argument. Sarah hadn't become a successful attorney by conceding points easily. "What exactly does this arrangement entail?" she finally asked, her tone shifting to professional inquiry. "Ranger stays with me 4 days, then with Caleb 3 days. We'll exchange him at the park, neutral territory. If either of us has a special circumstance, a trip, an appointment, we can be flexible." "And you trust this complete stranger to return your dog?" "Our dog," Raymond corrected gently. "And yes, I do. Caleb loves Ranger as much as I do, maybe more." He wouldn't disappear with him because that would mean never being able to return to Millfield again. Sarah sighed heavily. I don't like this, Dad. Not one bit. I understand your concern, but I'm asking you to trust my judgment on this. After extracting a promise from Raymond to call daily during the dog's first stay with Caleb, Sarah reluctantly ended the call. Raymond knew her concern came from love, but at 67, he sometimes found her protectiveness stifling. The arrangement began the following weekend. Raymond packed Storm's favorite toys, his special orthopedic bed, and a week's worth of the premium food he'd started purchasing once he realized how much the dog improved his own quality of life. The preparation felt oddly reminiscent of packing Eleanor's hospital bag during her final months, a thought he quickly pushed aside. At the park, Caleb was waiting with barely contained anticipation. The young veteran had shaved, gotten a haircut, and wore a pressed button-down shirt, clearly making every effort to present himself as responsible and trustworthy. I've set up his feeding and walking schedule here, Raymond explained, handing over a neatly typed sheet along with the supplies. He gets his joint supplement with breakfast, and he likes a longer walk in the evening. Caleb accepted the papers with the seriousness of a soldier receiving mission parameters. I'll follow this exactly. And I put my work schedule on this calendar for you so you know when I'm home and when my neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, will check on him during day shifts. The thoroughness of Caleb's preparation surprised and reassured Raymond. They exchanged phone numbers again, programmed into speed dial positions, and established protocols for emergencies. Call any time, Caleb insisted, day or night. And I mean anything, even if you just want to check how he's doing. As they prepared to part ways, Raymond found himself unexpectedly emotional. He knelt to Storm's level, scratching behind the ears that always leaned into his touch. "Be a good boy," he murmured. "I'll see you Wednesday." Storm licked his face once, then turned to Caleb with equal affection, seemingly content with the arrangement already. The dog's adaptability made Raymond feel both better about the situation and slightly jealous. The first night without Storm, Raymond's house felt emptier than he had anticipated. The absence of clicking nails on hardwood, the missing weight at the foot of his bed, the silent kitchen without the gentle thump of a tail against cabinet doors, all created a void that television and books couldn't fill. At 9:30, his phone rang. "Mr. Whitaker, sorry to call so late." Caleb's voice came through, background noise suggesting he was outdoors. "Just thought you might want to know Ranger settled in fine. We just finished our evening walk and he remembered all his old favorite spots." The consideration behind the call touched Raymond. "Thank you, Caleb. I appreciate that. He's sleeping on his bed now, snoring a little. Does he always do that after walks?" Raymond smiled despite himself. "Every time. Like clockwork." They chatted briefly about Storm's habits, the conversation surprisingly easy between two men separated by nearly 4 decades of age. After hanging up, Raymond slept better than he'd expected to. The first exchange went smoothly, then the second. By the 3rd week of their arrangement, they had established a rhythm that felt almost natural. Raymond found himself looking forward to their handovers at the park, which had evolved to include coffee from the small shop near the old mill. "How's the construction job going?" Raymond asked during one such exchange, genuinely interested in Caleb's progress. "Steady work," Caleb replied, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Foreman says he might move me to crew lead next month if things stay on track." "That's excellent news." "Ranger helps," Caleb admitted. "Having him those 3 days, knowing I'll see him again, it gives me structure, something to work toward." Raymond understood completely. "I find myself planning my week around his schedule too. Museum visits and doctor appointments on your days, park outings and book club on mine." What neither man acknowledged directly was how their own relationship was evolving alongside the custody arrangement. Their coffee meetings stretched longer, Conversations expanding beyond Storm to include Caleb's military service, Raymond's years in education, and their shared love of baseball, specifically the Washington Nationals, whose games they had both independently been streaming. During Storm's third stay with Caleb, Raymond received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Patterson, his next-door neighbor of 20 years. "Ray, is everything all right with that young man who takes your dog?" she asked without preamble, cornering him as he collected his mail. "People are talking." Raymond straightened to his full height, which at 6 feet still commanded respect despite his age. "Everything is fine, Betty. Caleb is a veteran who previously owned Storm. We have an arrangement that works for everyone." Mrs. Patterson looked unconvinced. "Well, Meredith Anderson at the pharmacy says he gets PTSD medication, says he can be jumpy, especially around loud noises. Is it safe, him having an animal that could be trained to be aggressive?" The speed with which small-town gossip traveled never ceased to amaze Raymond, even after a lifetime in Millfield. Storm is not trained for aggression. He's a support animal who helps Caleb manage his PTSD, which he developed serving our country, I might add. His tone must have carried more edge than intended, as Mrs. Patterson took a small step back. "We're just concerned, Ray. You've been through so much with Eleanor. The last thing you need is more trouble." The mention of Eleanor sent a familiar pang through Raymond's chest. "I appreciate the concern, but this arrangement is my decision. Storm is happy. Caleb is benefiting, and frankly, so am I." Word of the unusual custody arrangement spread through Millfield with predictable speed. Raymond found himself explaining the situation repeatedly, at the grocery store, at his monthly retired educator's lunch, even at church. Opinions divided along expected lines. Older residents expressed concern and skepticism, while those with family members in the military often voiced support. The controversy reached its peak when Raymond arrived for coffee one morning to find Caleb waiting with a troubled expression. "My landlord heard about our arrangement," he explained, hands wrapped tightly around his cup. "Says his insurance won't cover a part-time dog because it's a liability issue. Complete nonsense, but he's threatening to raise my rent or evict me." Raymond frowned. "That sounds discriminatory, especially given Ranger's support function. Without official certification, I don't have much legal standing." Caleb's shoulders slumped. "I've looked at other rentals in my price range, but nothing with a yard for Ranger." The problem occupied Raymond's thoughts throughout the day. That evening, while reviewing his monthly budget, a habit Eleanor had instilled early in their marriage, an idea began to form. His modest pension and savings were carefully managed, but there was a small surplus each month. The basement apartment in his home, originally created for Eleanor's mother before her passing, had stood empty for years. It was unorthodox, perhaps even foolish by conventional standards. Sarah would certainly oppose it, but the more Raymond considered it, the more sense it made. The next day, he broached the subject during their handover. "My house has a separate basement apartment," he began carefully. "Private entrance, small kitchen, its own bathroom. It's been empty since Eleanor's mother passed 15 years ago." Caleb looked up sharply. "Sir?" "The rent would be reasonable, just enough to cover utilities and contribute to property taxes. It would solve the custody logistics and your landlord problem simultaneously." The shock on Caleb's face gave way to cautious hope. "Are you serious? You'd rent to me?" "I'm proposing it, yes." Raymond sipped his coffee, maintaining a casual tone despite the significance of the offer. Storm would have full access to both spaces. No more transfers, no more dividing his life. "And," he added, acknowledging the practical benefit, "someone younger on the property for maintenance wouldn't hurt." Caleb seemed temporarily speechless. Finally, he managed, "Mr. Whitaker, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure? You barely know me." "I know enough," Raymond replied simply. And please, if we're going to be sharing a property, it's Raymond." The arrangement was finalized over the following week. Caleb gave notice to his landlord, Raymond cleared out the basement apartment, and Thomas helped assess what minor repairs were needed before occupancy. Sarah, as expected, expressed vociferous opposition when informed. "Living with a stranger? A combat veteran with PTSD? Dad, this is beyond reckless." "He's not a stranger anymore," Raymond countered. "And the basement has its own entrance. We'll only interact by choice. Until something triggers him and you're alone in the house with him," Raymond sighed. "Sarah, your concern is noted, but my mind is made up." The day Caleb moved in was unseasonably warm for April. Raymond found himself on the front porch, glass of lemonade in hand, watching as the young veteran efficiently transferred his modest possessions from a borrowed pickup truck. Storm supervised the entire operation with apparent satisfaction, trotting between the basement entrance and the truck as if conducting an inventory. "Doesn't have much, does he?" Thomas observed, having stopped by ostensibly to drop off a housewarming plant, but really, Raymond suspected, to assess the situation one final time. "When I was his age, I didn't either," Raymond replied. "Just Eleanor, a second-hand couch, and too many books." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "How are you doing, Ray? Really?" The question caught Raymond off guard. "Fine. Why?" "This is a big change. After 3 years of living alone, suddenly sharing your space, even part of it, and with Eleanor's anniversary coming up next month." Raymond hadn't thought about the timing, but Thomas was right. May 17th would mark 3 years since Eleanor's passing. The realization created a hollow feeling in his chest. "I'm okay, Tom. Better than I've been in a while, actually. Having Storm, Ranger, has helped. And this arrangement makes sense for everyone." Thomas seemed unconvinced but didn't press further. As he prepared to leave, he clasped Raymond's shoulder firmly. "Call if you need anything, day or night." "You sound like Caleb now," Raymond joked, though he appreciated the sentiment from both men. That evening, after Caleb had settled in, Raymond invited him up for dinner. A simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables, but a gesture of welcome nonetheless. They ate at the kitchen table. Storm settled between them, clearly delighted by the arrangement. "I can't thank you enough," Caleb said, helping clear the dishes afterward. "This changes everything for me." "It's mutually beneficial," Raymond replied, uncomfortable with gratitude. The basement needed using, and the steps were getting harder on my knees anyway. As they established their new routine over the following weeks, Raymond was surprised by how naturally Caleb fit into his life. The young veteran was respectful of boundaries, fastidious about maintenance as promised, and unexpectedly helpful with technology issues that had long frustrated Raymond. Their interaction settled into a comfortable pattern: morning coffee on the porch, weather permitting, occasional shared meals, and evening walks with Storm. Raymond began teaching Caleb the basics of chess, while Caleb introduced Raymond to podcasts about military history that they could discuss during their walks. Storm, for his part, seemed to thrive under the arrangement. The dog developed a routine of spending mornings upstairs with Raymond, afternoons downstairs with Caleb when he wasn't working, and alternating sleeping locations based on some internal algorithm known only to him. It was during one of their evening walks, nearly a month after Caleb moved in, that Raymond experienced the first hint of the challenges their arrangement might face. They had taken Storm to the larger park at the edge of town, allowing him more space to run. As they walked along the perimeter trail, a group of teenagers set off firecrackers in the parking lot, a common prank as summer approached. The sudden explosions triggered an immediate change in Caleb. His body tensed, eyes darting rapidly, breath coming in short gasps. Storm instantly pressed against his leg, but the dog's usual calming effect seemed insufficient against the continued bangs. "Down!" Caleb suddenly shouted, grabbing Raymond's arm and pulling him toward the ground with surprising strength. "Take cover!" Raymond found himself kneeling on the dirt path, Caleb's body partially shielding him, the young man's eyes wild and unfocused. "Caleb," he said firmly, recognizing the signs of a flashback from his years working with troubled students. "It's firecrackers. We're in Millfield Park. You're safe." Storm wedged himself between them, licking Caleb's face insistently and applying pressure against his chest. The dog's trained response, combined with Raymond's steady voice, gradually brought Caleb back to the present. "Mr. Whitaker," he gasped, recognition and then mortification flooding his features as he released Raymond's arm. "I'm so sorry. I thought—" "It's Raymond, remember? And there's nothing to apologize for." Raymond stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Let's head back. I think we could all use some quiet." They walked home in silence, Caleb's shame palpable despite Raymond's assurances. That night, Storm chose to sleep downstairs, seemingly recognizing where he was needed most. The incident, while concerning, also deepened Raymond's understanding of Caleb's struggles. It wasn't an abstract concept of PTSD anymore, but a vivid reality affecting someone he had come to care about. The next day, he left a book on trauma recovery on the kitchen table, one he'd consulted often during Eleanor's deepest depression. No words were exchanged about it, but the book disappeared for several days before returning with dog-eared pages. As May 17th approached, Raymond found himself increasingly withdrawn. His appetite diminished, sleep became elusive, and even Storm's companionship provided less comfort than usual. Caleb noticed the change but respected Raymond's privacy, simply ensuring that meals appeared in the refrigerator and the walkways remained clear of the spring debris that might cause a fall. On the morning of the anniversary itself, Raymond woke early with a heaviness in his chest that felt nearly physical. He dressed carefully in the suit he'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, planning to visit the cemetery alone as he had the previous 2 years. When he emerged from his bedroom, however, he found Caleb waiting in the kitchen, dressed in pressed slacks and a clean button-down shirt. Storm sat beside him, wearing a new blue bandana around his neck. "I hope you don't mind," Caleb said quietly. "Storm and I thought you might want company today, but we understand if you'd rather be alone." The consideration behind the gesture, and the fact that Caleb had clearly remembered the significance of the date from a single mention weeks earlier, brought unexpected tears to Raymond's eyes. "I'd appreciate the company," he managed to say. They drove to the cemetery in silence, Storm sitting calmly in the back seat. At Eleanor's grave, Raymond placed the yellow roses that had been her favorite, while Caleb and Storm waited at a respectful distance. After several minutes of private communion with his late wife, Raymond motioned them forward. "Eleanor would have liked you," he told Caleb. "She always said I was too quick to judge, too slow to extend second chances." Caleb looked down at the headstone, its surface still fresh compared to the weathered markers surrounding it. "She sounds like a wise woman. The wisest I've known." Raymond swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "Some days I still reach for her in bed before remembering." They stood in companionable silence, the spring breeze rustling through the cemetery's maple trees. Storm settled between them, leaning gently against Raymond's leg as if offering silent support. "Does it get easier?" Caleb asked suddenly, "losing someone that close?" Raymond considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not easier, different. The pain changes form, becomes something you carry, rather than something that crushes you." He paused, gathering thoughts he'd never fully articulated. "Some days I feel guilty for continuing to live when she couldn't." Caleb nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Survivor's guilt. We talked about that a lot in group therapy. After Max died, I couldn't understand why I made it home and he didn't. The parallel between their experiences, despite the different circumstances, created an unexpected bridge between them." As they walked back to the car, Raymond found himself sharing stories about Eleanor he had kept private since her death. Her terrible cooking but refusal to admit defeat, her habit of singing off-key to the radio, her fierce advocacy for students others had written off. That evening they sat on the porch with glasses of Eleanor's favorite wine, continuing the commemoration in a way that felt healing rather than mournful. Storm moved between them, occasionally resting his head on Raymond's knee as if sensing lingering sadness. "Thank you," Raymond said as the evening drew to a close. "Today was better than it might have been." Caleb nodded, understanding the understatement. "That's what Ranger does for me, makes the hard days bearable." Raymond looked at the German shepherd now dozing between their chairs. "He seems to have enough support for both of us." "More than enough," Caleb agreed with a small smile. As spring yielded to summer, their arrangement continued to evolve. Caleb was promoted to crew lead at the construction company, resulting in more regular hours and improved financial stability. Raymond found himself increasingly involved in community activities again, rejoining the library board he had abandoned after Eleanor's death and volunteering to mentor struggling students at his former school. Storm thrived under their shared care, his coat glossier and his energy levels higher than when either man had cared for him alone. The dog had developed an uncanny ability to sense which of his humans needed him most on any given day, often spending time with Raymond when memories of Eleanor pressed heavily, or staying close to Caleb when VA appointments or medication adjustments disturbed his equilibrium. Only one shadow loomed over their otherwise successful arrangement. Raymond had begun experiencing headaches of increasing frequency and severity. He dismissed them as tension or seasonal allergies, taking over-the-counter medication and keeping the issue to himself. The pain, however, was becoming harder to ignore, particularly when accompanied by occasional dizziness and nausea. One morning in early July, as Raymond reached for his coffee mug, his vision suddenly blurred. The mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. He gripped the counter, waiting for the spell to pass, unaware that Storm had immediately run to the basement entrance, barking urgently. Moments later, Caleb appeared, concern evident on his face. "Raymond, are you okay?" "Just clumsy," Raymond attempted to joke, but even to his own ears, his voice sounded weak. Caleb's eyes narrowed, taking in Raymond's pale complexion and unsteady stance. Before Raymond could protest, the young veteran was beside him, gently but firmly guiding him to a chair. "How long have you been having these episodes?" Caleb asked, his tone allowing no evasion. Raymond sighed, knowing the time for privacy had passed. "The headaches started a few months ago. The dizziness is more recent." "And you haven't seen a doctor?" Caleb's expression made his opinion of this decision clear. "I have an appointment next week," Raymond admitted. "I didn't want to worry anyone over what's probably just age catching up with me." Caleb was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Martinez." "These symptoms need attention now, not next week." Too exhausted to argue, Raymond allowed Caleb to make the call and then drive him to the urgent care clinic. Storm accompanied them, his behavior noticeably subdued, as if sensing the seriousness of the situation. Dr. Martinez's concern was evident after a preliminary examination. "I'm ordering a CT scan," she said firmly. "Today." By evening, Raymond found himself admitted to the regional hospital 30 miles away, the scan revealing a mass that required immediate attention from specialists. As nurses prepared him for additional tests, he watched Caleb make call after call, to Thomas, to the construction foreman explaining his absence, and finally, with Raymond's reluctant permission, to Sarah. "She's booking a flight from Chicago," Caleb reported, returning to Raymond's bedside. "Should be here by tomorrow afternoon." Raymond nodded, a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. The diagnosis was still preliminary, but the doctor's careful phrasing and urgent actions suggested serious concerns. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, his last conscious awareness was of Storm's head resting gently on the hospital bed beside his hand, and Caleb's steady presence in the uncomfortable visitor's chair nearby. The diagnosis came with clinical precision: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor already at stage 3. The neurologist, a woman with kind eyes and a direct manner, explained the situation while Sarah clutched Raymond's hand, her lawyer's composure temporarily abandoned. Given the location and progression, we recommend beginning treatment immediately, Dr. Abernathy concluded. A combination of surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy offers the best chance of extending quality of life. Raymond absorbed the information with the same methodical approach he'd once applied to school budget crises. "And without treatment?" he asked, ignoring Sarah's sharp intake of breath. 6 months? Possibly less, the doctor answered honestly. With treatment, potentially a year or more, though I must emphasize that this particular cancer is challenging to treat effectively. Sarah launched into a series of detailed questions about success rates, clinical trials, and specialized treatment centers. Raymond let her voice wash over him, his mind already processing implications beyond medical statistics. His gaze drifted to the hospital room window, where he could see Caleb in the parking lot below, walking Storm in careful circles, unaware that Raymond's life had just been assigned an expiration date. "Dad?" Sarah's voice penetrated his thoughts. "Dr. Abernathy needs to know your decision about surgery." Raymond turned back to the room, noting the expectant expressions directed his way. "I need a day to consider," he said finally. "This is a lot to process." After the doctor departed, Sarah's professional demeanor crumbled entirely. "A day? Dad? You heard her. This is aggressive." "Every day matters." "One day won't change the outcome, Sarah." Raymond squeezed her hand. "I need to think about what this means for my life, for Storm, for the arrangements I've made." Sarah's expression shifted from concern to realization. "This isn't about your tenant, is it? Dad, your life is at stake here." "My quality of life is at stake," Raymond corrected gently. "And Caleb and Storm are part of that now." The discussion continued into the evening, Sarah alternating between tearful pleas and logical arguments for immediate treatment. When Caleb was finally allowed to visit with Storm, a special exception granted by a sympathetic nurse who recognized the German Shepherd's calming effect on Raymond, Sarah pulled him aside for a whispered conversation that Raymond couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Later, when Sarah left to check into her hotel, Caleb took the chair beside Raymond's bed. Storm settled on the floor between them, his head resting on his paws, eyes moving between the two men as if following their conversation. "Sarah told you?" Raymond asked. Caleb nodded, his expression carefully controlled. "She did." "I'm so sorry, Raymond." "Don't be. I've had 67 good years. That's more than many get." Raymond adjusted his position, wincing as the movement triggered a spike of pain. "But I need to ask you something important." "Anything. If I undergo treatment, there will be days, perhaps many, when I can't properly care for Storm. And Sarah's life in Chicago doesn't allow for a dog, especially one with Storm's energy levels and needs." Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "You want me to take full custody again?" "During my treatment, yes. And afterward, depending on the outcome." Raymond held Caleb's gaze. "I need to know he'll be with someone who loves him as much as I do." "You know I do," Caleb affirmed, reaching down to stroke Storm's head. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Many patients respond well to treatment. You're strong, healthy, otherwise." Raymond appreciated the attempt at optimism but recognized it as the well-intentioned deception it was. In his decades as an educator, he'd seen enough terminal illness among staff and students' families to recognize the patterns of hope and decline. "Just promise me," Raymond pressed. "Whatever happens, Storm won't end up back at a shelter or with strangers." "I promise," Caleb said solemnly. "On my honor as a Marine." The following morning, Raymond consented to surgery, scheduled for 2 days later. Sarah immediately began coordinating with the hospital's social worker about aftercare options, researching rehabilitation facilities and home health agencies with the same thoroughness she applied to legal cases. "You'll need full-time assistance initially," she explained, showing Raymond brochures for various facilities. "These are the best options within 50 miles. Raymond shook his head. "I'll recover at home." "Dad, be reasonable. You'll be recovering from brain surgery, then starting radiation. You can't be alone." "I won't be," Raymond replied simply. "Caleb is there." Sarah's expression tightened. "A construction worker with PTSD is not qualified home health care. He managed battlefield injuries in Afghanistan. I think he can handle helping me to the bathroom and reminding me to take medications." Raymond kept his tone mild but firm. "This isn't negotiable, Sarah. I'm staying in my home with Storm and with the support system I've built." The surgery itself passed in a blur of anesthesia and disjointed awareness. Raymond's first clear memory afterward was opening his eyes to find Storm's face inches from his own, the dog's warm breath washing over him. Somehow, Caleb had managed to smuggle the German Shepherd into the ICU recovery room for a brief visit. "Hey, buddy," Raymond whispered, his throat raw from intubation. Storm responded with a gentle lick to his hand, careful to avoid the IV line. "The nurses are giving us exactly 3 minutes," Caleb warned from the doorway, keeping watch for hospital staff. But he wouldn't settle down at home, kept whining at the door. "I think he needed to see you were okay." Raymond managed a weak smile. "Good dog," he murmured, as Storm placed his head carefully on the edge of the bed, brown eyes fixed on Raymond's face with unmistakable concern. Recovery progressed slowly. After 5 days in the hospital, Raymond returned home to find the house transformed. The spare bedroom had been converted into a first-floor recovery room, complete with a hospital bed rented from a medical supply company. The bathroom featured newly installed grab bars, and the kitchen had been reorganized to place essential items within easy reach. "Caleb did all this," Sarah explained with grudging admiration as she helped Raymond settle in. "And he took time off work to be here for your first week home?" Raymond wasn't surprised. In the months they'd shared the house, he'd observed Caleb's meticulous attention to detail and problem-solving abilities. The young veteran approached challenges with the same tactical precision he'd likely employed in military operations. What did surprise Raymond was the network of support that materialized around them. Mrs. Patterson arrived with a weekly meal schedule organized among the neighbors. Thomas stopped by daily, often bringing newspapers or books. Even some of Raymond's former students appeared, offering to run errands or simply sit with him while Caleb attended necessary VA appointments. Storm adjusted to the new routine with remarkable sensitivity, seeming to understand that Raymond's condition required a gentler approach. The dog would lie beside the hospital bed for hours, occasionally rising to nudge Raymond's hand when pain medication wore off, often before Raymond himself recognized the need. "He always knows," Caleb observed one evening, watching Storm alert to Raymond's discomfort. "Better than any monitor." The first round of chemotherapy hit Raymond harder than expected. The nausea and fatigue were relentless, leaving him weak and discouraged. During the worst days, when he could barely lift his head from the pillow, Storm maintained constant vigil, while Caleb managed medications, hydration, and the steady stream of well-meaning visitors that Sarah had to be convinced to turn away. It was during this period, when Raymond's defenses were lowered by illness and medication, that he found himself sharing thoughts he'd kept private for years. "Eleanor didn't die of cancer," he admitted one evening as Caleb helped him back to bed after a difficult trip to the bathroom. "That's what I tell everyone, but it's not true." Caleb paused, supporting Raymond's weight as the older man regained his balance. "You don't have to explain anything to me." "I want to," Raymond insisted. "I've carried it alone too long." Once settled against his pillows, Storm immediately positioning himself alongside the bed, Raymond continued. "Eleanor suffered from depression for decades. We managed it together, medication, therapy, lifestyle adjustments. She had good years and difficult ones." Caleb sat quietly, offering the gift of attentive silence. 3 years ago, she went through a particularly severe episode. I thought we were handling it. She seemed to be improving. Raymond's voice grew hoarse with emotion. "I came home from a doctor's appointment and found her. She'd taken all her medication at once, along with mine." "I'm so sorry," Caleb said softly. "The worst part wasn't finding her. It was realizing I'd missed the signs. I, who knew her better than anyone, who'd helped her through countless dark periods." Raymond's hands trembled slightly. "I failed her when she needed me most." Storm whined softly, sensing the emotional distress, and pressed closer to the bed. Caleb reached out, briefly touching Raymond's shoulder in a gesture of understanding that required no words. "That's why you took Storm's situation so seriously," Caleb realized aloud. "Why you understood what he means to me." Raymond nodded. "I couldn't save Eleanor, but maybe I could help save you both." The confession created a deeper bond between them, a shared understanding of loss and guilt that transcended their differences in age and experience. In the days that followed, Caleb began sharing more about his own struggles, the nightmares that still plagued him, the survivor's guilt that had nearly destroyed him after his best friend's death, the failed marriage that had collapsed under the weight of his unprocessed trauma. "Max and I enlisted together," he explained one afternoon while changing Raymond's bandages with careful precision. "High school friends who thought we'd have grand adventures. His mother begged him not to go. Mine was too deep in her own addiction to notice." Raymond listened, recognizing Caleb's need to unburden himself to someone who wouldn't judge. "We were assigned to the same unit in Afghanistan. 8 months into our second tour, our convoy hit an IED. Caleb's hands remained steady despite the difficulty of the memory. Max was in the vehicle ahead of mine. I saw it happen, tried to reach him, but—" Storm moved from Raymond's side to press against Caleb's leg, offering the comfort he'd been trained to provide. "The official report called it instantaneous. No suffering." Caleb's voice had gone flat, clinical. "But I was there. I know it wasn't quick. I know he called for his mother." Raymond reached out, grasping Caleb's wrist with surprising strength. "You carried too much, son." The word son hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging its significance directly, but both feeling its weight. As Raymond's first round of treatment concluded, Dr. Abernathy scheduled a follow-up scan to assess the tumor's response. The day before the appointment, Sarah arrived unexpectedly, having flown in from Chicago without warning. "I wanted to be here for the results," she explained, setting her overnight bag in the guest room, "and to check on how you're really doing, not just the sanitized version you give me over the phone." Her skepticism faded as she observed the household in operation. Caleb moved efficiently through the medical routines Raymond required, having developed systems for medication management, symptom tracking, and coordination with various healthcare providers. Storm seemed to function as both emotional support and practical assistant, retrieving items Raymond pointed to and alerting Caleb when Raymond's pain levels increased. "I'm impressed," Sarah admitted that evening, helping Caleb prepare dinner while Raymond rested. "You've created quite the care team here," Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "It's what anyone would do." "No," Sarah contradicted, chopping vegetables with precise, attorney-like efficiency. "It's not what anyone would do. It's extraordinary, especially considering you barely knew my father 6 months ago. He gave me and Ranger a second chance when he had no reason to trust me. This is the least I can do in return." The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the hospital, Raymond experienced a seizure, a possible side effect of the tumor that Dr. Abernathy had warned might occur. One moment he was sitting at the kitchen table, and the next he was on the floor, body rigid, a strangled sound escaping his throat. Sarah froze in panic, but Caleb moved with immediate, practiced calm. He cushioned Raymond's head, turned him gently onto his side, and spoke reassuringly, even though Raymond couldn't respond. Storm pressed against Raymond's back, providing stability and warmth until the convulsions subsided. "Call 911, Caleb directed Sarah, who seemed to recover her composure at the clear instruction. In the ambulance, as paramedics monitored his vital signs, Raymond drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the fog, he was aware of Caleb's voice speaking to the medical team, providing precise information about Raymond's medication regimen, treatment history, and the duration and characteristics of the seizure. "Military medical training?" one paramedic asked, impressed by Caleb's knowledge. "Combat casualty care in Afghanistan," Caleb confirmed. "And I've been reading everything I can about glioblastoma." At the hospital, events unfolded with alarming speed. The scheduled scan was expedited, additional tests were ordered, and Raymond found himself surrounded by specialists conferring in hushed tones just beyond his hearing. Sarah remained at his side, her lawyer's assertiveness ensuring they received prompt attention and complete information. When Dr. Abernathy finally entered with the scan results, her expression told Raymond everything before she spoke a word. "The tumor is not responding as we'd hoped," she explained gently. "In fact, there's evidence of accelerated growth despite our aggressive treatment approach." Sarah immediately began questioning alternative treatments, experimental options, specialized centers. Raymond, however, felt an odd sense of calm clarity descending. He'd suspected this outcome from the beginning, had perhaps been preparing for it since the initial diagnosis. "What's the revised prognosis?" he asked, interrupting Sarah's increasingly desperate questions. Dr. Abernathy met his gaze directly. "Without a significant change in the tumor's response to treatment, we're looking at 3 to 4 months. The hospital room fell silent. Through the window, Raymond could see Caleb in the parking lot below, once again walking Storm in careful circles, waiting for news he couldn't yet anticipate. "I'd like to discontinue chemotherapy," Raymond stated, his decision already formed. "Dad?" Sarah protested immediately. "You can't give up. There are other options, clinical trials, alternative treatments." "I'm not giving up," Raymond corrected her gently. "I'm choosing quality over quantity. The treatment is making me too ill to enjoy the time I have left." Dr. Abernathy nodded, understanding evident in her expression. "Many patients make this choice, Miss Whitaker. Your father's decision is rational and deserves respect." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally tearful acceptance of her father's wishes. When Caleb was eventually allowed to join them, Raymond explained the situation with the same calm clarity he'd once used to explain difficult concepts to struggling students. "So I'm coming home," he concluded, "for whatever time remains." Caleb absorbed the news stoically, though Raymond could see the impact in the tightening of his jaw and the brief closing of his eyes. "We'll make it good time," he promised simply. That evening, as Raymond prepared for discharge, he found himself alone with Sarah for the first time since the news. "I need to tell you something," he began, taking her hand. "Something I should have shared years ago." With careful words, Raymond finally revealed the truth about Eleanor's death. Sarah listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she learned the secret her father had carried alone for 3 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked when he finished. "To protect you, to protect her memory, to avoid the questions and judgments that come with suicide." Raymond squeezed her hand. "But mostly because I was ashamed. I should have seen it coming. I should have prevented it." "Oh, Dad." Sarah moved to sit on the edge of the hospital bed, embracing him carefully around the IV lines. "You couldn't have known. Depression lies. It convinces people to hide their deepest pain from those they love most. That's what my therapist said too, Raymond admitted. I just couldn't believe it. Is that why you connected so quickly with Caleb? Because you recognized the same struggles? Raymond nodded. And because Storm gave me a purpose when I'd lost mine. Just like he does for Caleb. Sarah wiped her eyes, visibly processing everything she'd learned. I've been unfair to Caleb, haven't I? Suspicious of his motives, questioning his stability. You were protecting me, just as I tried to protect you from the truth about your mother. Raymond smiled sadly. We're quite the pair, aren't we? For the first time in years, Sarah laughed through her tears. Stubborn Whitakers, Mom always said. When they returned home the following day, Raymond found the house transformed once again. The hospital bed had been moved to the sunroom overlooking the backyard, positioned to capture morning light and provide a view of the bird feeders Eleanor had loved. Fresh flowers brightened every room, and the refrigerator was stocked with Raymond's favorite foods, those that had appealed even during the worst of his treatment side effects. The neighbors helped, Caleb explained, noticing Raymond's surprise. Everyone wanted to do something. In the days that followed, Raymond's condition stabilized somewhat without the harsh effects of chemotherapy. Though weaker and often in pain, he found himself more present, more able to appreciate small pleasures, the warmth of sunshine through the windows, the rich aroma of coffee he could finally taste again, the comforting weight of Storm against his side. Sarah extended her stay, working remotely from the dining room table, stepping into a care partnership with Caleb that gradually evolved from awkward coordination to seamless teamwork. Raymond observed their growing rapport with quiet satisfaction, recognizing the healing occurring between his daughter and the young man who had become so important in his life. One evening, as Sarah helped him prepare for bed, she broached a subject Raymond had been anticipating. Dad, I've been thinking about what happens after. She paused, still struggling with direct references to his impending death. About Storm. Raymond nodded encouragingly. I know I said I couldn't take him, and that's still true with my apartment and travel schedule. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. But I want you to know I support whatever arrangement you want to make with Caleb. I've seen how he cares for Storm, and for you. I trust him. The admission clearly cost her some pride, but Raymond recognized it as the gift it was. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know. Later that night, unable to sleep despite medication, Raymond heard voices from the porch. Curious, he activated the baby monitor Caleb had installed to hear Raymond's calls for assistance, reversing its function to listen instead. Never seen a bond like theirs, Sarah was saying, her voice slightly distorted through the small speaker. Even when Dad's confused from pain medication, Storm knows exactly what he needs. Ranger's special that way, Caleb replied. Saved my life more than once. A silence followed, broken by the sound of ice clinking in glasses. Then Sarah spoke again, her tone hesitant. Can I ask you something personal? About your PTSD? Sure. How did you know you needed help, that you couldn't handle it alone? Raymond held his breath, sensing the importance of this conversation. I didn't, Caleb admitted. I thought I could power through. Marines don't ask for help, you know. But then I found myself standing on Carter's Bridge at 2 a.m, wondering if the fall would kill me instantly, or if I'd just be maimed. God, Sarah whispered. A patrol officer spotted me, called it in. VA Crisis Intervention got involved. That's how I ended up with Ranger. He was part of a pilot program pairing rescue dogs with veterans at risk. Another pause, longer this time. Why do you ask? Caleb finally questioned. Sarah's voice, when it came, was almost too quiet for the monitor to pick up. I think I might need to talk to someone. About Mom. About Dad. about everything I've been pushing down for years. The VA has good resources, but they're not just for veterans. I can get you some contacts. I'd appreciate that. Raymond switched off the monitor, not wanting to intrude further on their private conversation. A complex emotion washed over him, grief that Sarah was struggling, but profound relief that she was finally acknowledging it. Perhaps, in its way, his illness was offering a last opportunity to heal wounds he hadn't even known existed. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. Amy Harrington, Caleb's ex-wife, arrived unannounced, her appearance at the door sending Storm into an immediate alert stance. "I need to speak with Caleb," she told Raymond, who had answered the door during one of his stronger periods. Her eyes darted nervously to Storm, who stood rigidly at Raymond's side. Before Raymond could respond, Caleb emerged from the kitchen, freezing when he saw who was at the door. "Amy, what are you doing here?" "My restraining order expired last month," she explained. "And I heard about your situation here. Small-town gossip." Raymond glanced between them, sensing the complex history vibrating in the air. "I'll give you some privacy," he offered, beginning to turn toward his room. "No need, Raymond," Caleb said quickly. "Amy and I can talk outside." Storm whined softly, clearly torn between staying with Raymond and following Caleb. After a moment's hesitation, the dog settled beside Raymond, though his attention remained fixed on the door after Caleb and Amy stepped onto the porch. From the window, Raymond could see them engaged in intense conversation. Amy gestured emphatically while Caleb stood with military stillness, speaking little. After nearly 20 minutes, they appeared to reach some resolution. Amy nodded, briefly touched Caleb's arm, and returned to her car. When Caleb re-entered the house, his expression was unreadable. "Everything all right?" Raymond asked. "Yes," Caleb said after a moment. "She wanted to tell me she's getting married. Wanted to check if I was stable. Her fiancé was concerned about the history." "And are you?" "Stable?" Raymond kept his tone neutral. A small smile touched Caleb's lips. "More than I've been in years, actually." "I told her about Ranger, about this arrangement, about how things have changed." He paused. "She seemed happy for me. Said I seemed like the Caleb she first knew, before deployment changed everything." Raymond nodded, understanding the significance of this assessment from someone who had known Caleb before trauma reshaped him. "That's quite a compliment." "It is." Caleb knelt to ruffle Storm's fur. "And it's thanks to this guy." "And to you, Raymond." As July gave way to August, Raymond's condition deteriorated more rapidly than even Dr. Abernathy had predicted. The seizures increased in frequency despite medication, and periods of confusion began to punctuate his formerly clear thinking. Throughout it all, Storm remained his constant companion, while Caleb and Sarah worked in shifts to ensure Raymond was never alone. During a rare moment of complete lucidity, Raymond called Caleb and Sarah to his bedside. Storm, as always, lay alongside him, a warm presence against his increasingly frail body. "I need to discuss arrangements," Raymond began, holding up a hand when Sarah started to protest. "Not funeral plans. We've already covered those. I'm talking about living arrangements." Caleb and Sarah exchanged confused glances. "Sarah, I know you've been considering relocating to Virginia to be closer to me, but that won't be necessary soon." Raymond reached for her hand. "However, I'd like you to consider moving back anyway, not for me, but for yourself, to be closer to your roots, to your mother's memory, to the community that still cares about you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dad." "Let me finish while my mind is clear," Raymond insisted gently. "I'm leaving the house to both of you. Joint ownership." The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. The mortgage is paid off. The property taxes are reasonable. Sarah, you could open a small practice here. Millfield needs good attorneys. And Caleb, you could continue living in the basement apartment or take over the main house if Sarah prefers her own place. Raymond, I can't accept, Caleb began. You can and you will. Raymond cut him off with a hint of his old principal's authority. Consider it Storm's inheritance if that makes it easier. He needs both of you. Raymond's gaze moved to the German shepherd, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand the importance of the conversation. He's been the bridge between us all along. First between Caleb and me, then between Sarah and Caleb. He belongs with both of you, and you both belong here, where you can heal and build something new. The proposal hung in the air between them, audacious in its assumption that these two very different people, connected only through Raymond and a German shepherd, could form some kind of unconventional family after he was gone. I'd need to find work here, Sarah said finally, the practical consideration revealing she was actually considering the idea. And sell my condo in Chicago. Construction is booming in the county, Caleb offered cautiously, and the courthouse is being renovated. They'll need contract reviews, permit applications. Raymond smiled, listening to them tentatively explore possibilities, already problem-solving together. Whether they ultimately accepted his proposal or not, he had planted a seed. Sometimes, he reflected, that was all a teacher could do. Present an option and trust that his students would find their own way toward the right answer. As the conversation continued around him, Raymond felt a strange sense of peace descending. Storm's head rested heavily on his lap. The dog's warmth, a constant comfort against the pain that medication could no longer fully mask. Through the sunroom windows he could see Eleanor's garden, now tended by Caleb with unexpected skill, blooming with the late summer flowers she had always loved. It will work, Raymond murmured, more to himself than to the others, his hand resting on Storm's head. You'll see. August slipped into September with the subtle shifts that only lifelong residents of Virginia recognized. Not yet cooler temperatures, but changing quality of light, the altered angle of shadows across Raymond's sunroom as he dozed through increasingly longer periods of each day. The hospice nurse, Angela, now visited daily, adjusting medications and providing quiet support to Sarah and Caleb, who maintained their vigilant care despite visible exhaustion. Storm had become Raymond's shadow, refusing to leave his side even for walks, until Caleb had to carry the reluctant dog outside for necessary breaks. The German shepherd would return immediately to Raymond's bedside, pressing his body against the hospital bed's railing as if trying to meld with the man who had become his second savior. He knows, Angela commented one afternoon, checking Raymond's vital signs while Storm watched her every move with careful attention. Animals always know. It's why they make such good companions at this stage. Sarah nodded, her formerly polished appearance now softened by weeks of caregiving, hair pulled back simply, designer clothes replaced by comfortable basics, the sharp attorney gradually giving way to simply a daughter facing her father's mortality. He barely eats now unless Dad's having a good day, she observed. It's like he's synchronized himself to Dad's condition. The observation proved increasingly accurate as Raymond's decline accelerated. On Raymond's better days, when pain was manageable and confusion minimal, Storm would eat normally and even engage in brief play with Caleb in the yard, always within sight of Raymond's window. On Raymond's worst days, when seizures or pain overwhelmed him, Storm would refuse food entirely, maintaining his protective position by the bed with unwavering dedication. It was during one such difficult period, when Raymond had been largely unresponsive for nearly 2 days, that the crisis occurred. Sarah had gone into town for supplies, and Caleb was alone with Raymond and Storm when an overnight thunderstorm knocked out power to their section of Millfield. The backup generator, which Raymond had installed years earlier primarily for Eleanor's medical equipment, failed to engage, Caleb immediately called the power company and began implementing the contingency plan they had developed for such emergencies. Raymond's oxygen concentrator switched automatically to battery backup, but his specialized hospital bed, which prevented bed sores through programmed position changes, went still. More critically, the air conditioning that kept Raymond comfortable despite the fever accompanying his condition shut down, leaving the sunroom vulnerable to the late summer heat. "It's okay, Raymond," Caleb assured him, checking the oxygen equipment. "Backup systems are working. Power company says it should be restored within a few hours." Raymond, drifting in a medication-induced haze, merely nodded slightly. Storm, however, seemed agitated, pacing between Raymond's bed and the window, whining softly. "What is it, buddy?" Caleb asked, approaching the dog. "You need to go out?" Storm ignored the question, continuing his restless movement. When Caleb checked the window, he saw nothing unusual, just rain-slicked streets and the occasional debris from the storm. The dog's uncharacteristic behavior, however, triggered Caleb's combat-honed instincts for approaching danger. He checked Raymond again, confirming stable breathing and pulse. The bedroom's temperature was rising noticeably as morning sun hit the windows, but not yet dangerously so. Nothing seemed immediately amiss, yet Storm's agitation continued to escalate. Then Caleb smelled it, the faint but unmistakable odor of electrical burning. "Storm, stay with Raymond," he commanded sharply, the military tone returning to his voice as he moved quickly toward the basement door. The smell intensified as he descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The generator housing, installed against the far basement wall, was emitting wisps of smoke from its control panel. Caleb approached cautiously, evaluating the situation with the calm assessment he'd developed clearing buildings in Helmand Province. The mechanical failure was triggering an electrical short, which, combined with the old house's wiring, created a significant fire risk. Caleb moved quickly, disconnecting the main power as he'd been trained during his construction work. He called the fire department, then Sarah, explaining the situation with efficient precision. After ensuring the immediate danger was contained, he returned upstairs to find Raymond's condition unchanged, but Storm in a state of extreme distress. The dog was trembling, panting heavily, pacing in tight circles. As Caleb approached, Storm barked sharply, the first time he had made such a sound in the house. "What's wrong, Ranger?" Caleb reverted to the dog's original name, kneeling to check him for injury. "Are you hurt?" Storm pulled away, moving to Raymond's side and barking again, then returning to Caleb and tugging at his sleeve with uncharacteristic roughness. Caleb turned his attention to Raymond, checking his vital signs more carefully. The oxygen saturation monitor showed declining levels despite the backup system. A closer inspection revealed the cause. The backup battery was depleting faster than expected, the indicator light flashing a warning that had been obscured by the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "Good boy," Caleb said urgently, understanding Storm's warning. "Good job, Ranger." Moving quickly, Caleb retrieved the emergency oxygen tank from the hallway closet, switching Raymond's supply while calling Angela's emergency number. The hospice nurse promised to arrive within 15 minutes with additional equipment. "Raymond, can you hear me?" Caleb asked, gently patting the older man's cheek. "We're having a power issue, but everything's under control. Sarah's on her way back, and Angela's coming with more oxygen." Raymond's eyes flickered open briefly. "Storm?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He's right here," Caleb assured him, guiding Storm closer so Raymond could feel his presence. "He actually just saved the day. Alerted me to your oxygen running low." A faint smile touched Raymond's lips as his hand moved slightly, seeking the dog's fur. Storm immediately pressed his head under Raymond's palm, whining softly. The next hour passed in controlled chaos as Sarah returned, followed by Angela, the fire department, and an emergency technician from the power company. The generator issue was addressed, power was restored to their section of the grid, and Raymond's medical equipment returned to normal function. "That was too close," Sarah said later, collapsing into a kitchen chair after the various emergency personnel had departed. If Caleb hadn't noticed the generator problem, it wasn't me, Caleb corrected, placing a cup of coffee in front of her. It was Storm. He knew something was wrong before I detected anything. They both looked toward the sunroom where Storm had resumed his position beside Raymond, who had fallen into exhausted sleep after the commotion. He really is extraordinary, Sarah acknowledged. I've never seen anything like it. That's why I couldn't lose him, Caleb said quietly. Why I came looking for him after I surrendered him. He's not just a pet or even a support animal. He's family, Sarah finished for him. I understand now. The generator incident marked a turning point in Raymond's decline. Though the immediate crisis had been resolved without lasting harm, the stress seemed to accelerate his deterioration. Dr. Abernathy, visiting the house the following day, confirmed what they already sensed. Days, perhaps a week, she told Sarah and Caleb gently, stepping into the kitchen to give them privacy for this final prognosis. He's transitioning into the terminal phase. The most important thing now is comfort care. Sarah nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. He's been in so much pain. Is there anything more we can do? Angela will adjust his medication protocol. He'll be less conscious, but more comfortable. The doctor placed a compassionate hand on Sarah's shoulder. Many patients rally briefly near the end, a window of clarity before the final decline. If there's anything that needs to be said, be prepared for that opportunity. After Dr. Abernathy left, Sarah and Caleb sat at the kitchen table in stunned silence. Though they had been preparing for this moment for months, its immediate reality left them temporarily adrift. I should call the minister, Sarah finally said, reaching for her phone. And I'll update Thomas and the neighbors, Caleb added. They'll want to know. The practical tasks provided temporary structure amid their grief. By evening, word had spread throughout Millfield. The house filled briefly with visitors paying final respects, former students, fellow educators, neighbors bearing food and flowers. Thomas stayed longest, sitting silently beside his old friend's bed, occasionally sharing quiet memories of their decades of friendship. Through it all, Storm maintained his protective vigil, allowing visitors near Raymond but watching with alert attention, occasionally rising to nudge aside those who stayed too long or spoke too loudly. The dog seemed to understand intrinsically when Raymond needed rest, signaling visitors with a subtle placement of his body between them and the bed. Never seen anything like it, Thomas commented to Caleb as he prepared to leave. That dog's more effective than any nurse. The predicted rally came 3 days later. Raymond woke in the early morning with unexpected clarity, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Sarah? Caleb? He called, the sound bringing them both running from their respective resting places. Dad? Sarah knelt beside the bed, taking his hand. Do you need something? Just to see you both, Raymond replied, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. And to ask a favor. Caleb moved to the opposite side of the bed, Storm rising to press against his leg as if sensing the importance of the moment. Anything, Sarah promised. Take me outside, to Eleanor's garden, one last time. Sarah glanced uncertainly at Caleb, concern about moving Raymond evident in her expression. We can manage it, Caleb said decisively. We'll use the transport wheelchair and bring the portable oxygen. It's a beautiful morning. Together, they carefully transferred Raymond from the hospital bed to the specialized wheelchair, arranging oxygen tubing and IV lines with practiced coordination. Storm paced anxiously during the transfer, clearly distressed by Raymond's movement, but understanding enough not to interfere. The September morning greeted them with perfect clarity, crisp air hinting at approaching autumn, sunlight filtering through maple leaves just beginning to contemplate their seasonal change. Eleanor's garden, meticulously maintained by Caleb throughout the summer, offered a final flourish of black-eyed Susans and late roses, their scent perfuming the air around the small stone bench where Raymond had requested to sit. "Perfect," Raymond murmured as they settled him, Storm immediately positioning himself against Raymond's legs. "This is where Eleanor was happiest, where I was happiest with her." Sarah arranged a blanket over his lap despite the mild temperature, her hands betraying nervous energy. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" Raymond shook his head slightly. "Just sit with me. Both of you." They complied, Sarah perching on the bench beside him, while Caleb sat cross-legged on the garden path, one hand resting on Storm's back. For several minutes, they simply existed together, absorbing the garden's peace, the morning bird song, the gentle rhythm of shared breathing. "I want to tell you a story," Raymond finally said, his voice soft but steady. "About how Eleanor and I met." Though Sarah had heard the story countless times throughout her childhood, she listened attentively as Raymond recounted his first encounter with Eleanor at a college debate competition. She, arguing passionately for educational reform, he captivated by her intelligence and conviction despite supporting the opposing position. "She won the debate and my heart in the same 15 minutes, Raymond concluded with a smile. "I knew then that life with her would never be predictable, never be boring." "You never told me you were on opposite sides of the debate," Sarah noted with surprise. "Because it didn't matter," Raymond replied. "What mattered was recognizing someone whose values aligned with mine, even if our approaches differed." His gaze moved between Sarah and Caleb. "Sometimes, the most meaningful connections come from unexpected directions." The implication hung in the air, Raymond's matchmaking intention thinly veiled. Sarah flushed slightly while Caleb studied the garden path with sudden interest. "Dad, we're not—" Sarah began awkwardly. "Of course not," Raymond interrupted with a weak chuckle. "I'm simply saying that family takes many forms. The one we're born into, the one we choose, the one that finds us when we least expect it." His hand moved to Storm's head. "Sometimes it even has 4 legs." The moment was interrupted by a sudden weakness that passed through Raymond, his body sagging slightly against Sarah's support. Concern flickered across Caleb's face as he rose quickly to adjust the oxygen flow. "Perhaps we should head back inside," Sarah suggested worriedly. "Not yet," Raymond insisted, though his voice had weakened. "There's something else I need to say." With visible effort, he straightened slightly. "Sarah, I am so proud of the woman you've become. Your mother would be too. But we both wanted more for you than just professional success. We wanted you to find joy, connection, purpose beyond work." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dad—" "Let me finish," Raymond requested gently. "I see you starting to find those things here, reconnecting with Millfield, with family history, with yourself. Whether you stay here after I'm gone or return to Chicago, please carry that awareness with you. Life is too short for all work and no joy." He turned his attention to Caleb. "And you, young man, you've traveled a harder road than most, carried burdens no one should have to bear alone. But you're finding your way back. Don't lose that momentum." Caleb nodded, swallowing hard against visible emotion. "You both think I brought you together for Storm's sake," Raymond continued, his breath coming more laboriously now. "And that was part of it. But the truth is, I think you need each other as much as you need him. Different wounds, similar healing." Storm whined softly, pressing closer to Raymond as if sensing his fading strength. "I'm tired now," Raymond acknowledged, eyes growing heavy. "I think I'd like to go back inside." The return journey to the house proved more difficult as Raymond's brief rally began to fade. By the time they settled him back in the hospital bed, he had slipped into a semi-conscious state, responsive only to direct questions, and Storm's persistent presence against his side. That afternoon, while Sarah made necessary calls to distant relatives, Caleb sat beside Raymond's bed. Storm stretched alongside the older man as had become his custom. In a moment of privacy, Caleb finally voiced the question that had troubled him for months. "Why did you trust me, Raymond?" he asked softly, uncertain if Raymond could even hear him. "From the beginning, when you had every reason to be suspicious, why take the chance?" To his surprise, Raymond's eyes opened slightly. "Saw myself," he whispered. "After Eleanor. Lost. Storm knew. Dogs always know." The simple answer held profound truth. Raymond had recognized in Caleb the same grief-stricken isolation he had experienced after Eleanor's death, and had understood that Storm represented a lifeline for both of them, a way back to connection and purpose. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "For everything." Raymond's hand moved slightly, seeking contact. When Caleb took it, the older man's fingers closed with surprising strength. "Promise me," Raymond managed. "Anything. Take care of them. Sarah, Storm, yourself." "I promise," Caleb replied solemnly. "On my honor as a Marine." Raymond nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied, then drifted back into unresponsiveness. Caleb maintained his position, holding Raymond's hand until Sarah returned, her eyes red-rimmed but composure restored. "Any change?" she asked, setting down the legal pad where she'd been making necessary arrangements. Caleb shook his head. "He woke briefly, asked me to look after you and Storm." A small, sad smile touched Sarah's lips. "He asked me the same about you yesterday. Always the principle, making sure everyone's taken care of." That evening, as sunset painted the room in amber light reminiscent of Eleanor's garden, Raymond's breathing pattern changed. Angela, returning for her evening visit, recognized the sign immediately. "It won't be long now," she told them gently. "Hours, perhaps. He's comfortable. This is a peaceful transition." Sarah nodded, tears streaming silently down her face as she took position on one side of the bed. Caleb sat opposite her, while Storm maintained his place alongside Raymond, head resting near the older man's hand. As darkness fell, Raymond's breaths grew increasingly sporadic, the spaces between them lengthening. Sarah read softly from Eleanor's favorite poetry collection, while Caleb maintained a silent vigil, one hand on Storm's back, the other occasionally adjusting Raymond's blanket or moistening his lips with a special sponge. Shortly after midnight, Storm suddenly raised his head, ears alert, eyes fixed on Raymond's face. The dog whined once, softly, then fell silent, pressing his body impossibly closer to Raymond. "Dad?" Sarah whispered, recognizing the change before Caleb did. Angela, dozing in a chair nearby, woke immediately at Sarah's tone. She moved to the bedside, checking Raymond's pulse and respiration with gentle efficiency. "He's gone," she confirmed softly, peacefully, in his sleep. Sarah broke into quiet sobs, while Caleb remained motionless, a single tear tracking down his face. Storm, however, exhibited the most profound reaction. The German Shepherd rose to his full height, placed his front paws carefully on the edge of the bed, and leaned forward to press his muzzle against Raymond's cheek in a final goodbye. Then, with deliberate movement, he settled back onto the floor and released a long, low howl that seemed to contain all the grief none of them could adequately express. The sound broke the emotional dam for both humans. Sarah reached across the bed, grasping Caleb's hand in shared mourning as Storm's lament echoed through the quiet house, carrying Raymond's passing into the night. The following days passed in the peculiar timelessness that accompanies profound loss. Sarah managed funeral arrangements with her attorney's precision, while Caleb handled practical matters at the house, receiving visitors and coordinating the community's outpouring of support. Storm moved between them like a silent sentinel, subdued but attentive, occasionally disappearing to lie on Raymond's empty bed before returning to check on his remaining humans. The funeral itself drew a crowd that overflowed the small Methodist church where Raymond and Eleanor had attended for decades. Former students, colleagues, and community members filled every available space, many standing along the walls to pay final respects to the principal who had shaped generations of Millfield residents. As family, Sarah sat in the front row with Storm beside her, the German Shepherd's exceptional behavior drawing no objections despite the formal setting. Caleb had offered to sit further back, uncertain of his place, but Sarah had grasped his arm firmly. "You're family now, too," she'd said simply. "Dad made that clear." Thomas delivered a moving eulogy highlighting Raymond's dedication to education and community, his friendship, and his resilience through personal loss. Several former students spoke about Raymond's impact on their lives, sharing stories that ranged from humorous to deeply touching. When the minister invited others to share memories, so many people rose that the service extended well beyond its planned duration. Throughout the ceremony, Storm remained perfectly still beside Sarah, his attention focused on the large photograph of Raymond displayed near the casket. Only once did he make a sound, a soft whine when the organist played Amazing Grace, which had been Eleanor's favorite hymn and a melody Raymond had often hummed while working in the garden. At the graveside service, as Raymond was laid to rest beside Eleanor under a sprawling oak tree, Storm's behavior changed subtly. The dog became increasingly restless, moving between Sarah and Caleb with growing agitation. As the final prayers concluded and mourners began to disperse, Storm suddenly pulled away from Sarah's hold, darting toward the parking area. "Storm!" Sarah called, alarmed by the uncharacteristic behavior. Caleb was already moving, following the German Shepherd with the quick response of military training. "I'll get him," he called back to Sarah. "Wait here." Storm led Caleb to the far side of the cemetery parking lot, where Caleb's truck stood alongside dozens of other vehicles. For one terrible moment, Caleb feared the dog was attempting to flee in his grief, a behavior sometimes observed in animals who lost beloved owners. Instead, Storm circled the truck urgently, barking at the closed door. "What is it, buddy?" Caleb asked, approaching cautiously. "What's wrong?" When he opened the truck door, Storm immediately jumped inside, pawing at the glove compartment with unusual insistence. Baffled, Caleb opened it, revealing nothing but vehicle registration papers and maintenance records. "There's nothing here, Ranger," he said gently, reverting to the dog's original name in his confusion. Storm continued pawing, then suddenly pushed his muzzle beneath the truck's floor mat, emerging with something clutched gently in his teeth, a small leather pouch Caleb had never seen before. The dog placed it carefully in Caleb's hand, then sat back, watching expectantly. Bewildered, Caleb opened the pouch to find a set of dog tags inside, not military identification, but actual tags for a dog collar, engraved with the name Max, and a phone number Caleb recognized as his own former landline from years earlier. "How?" Caleb whispered, stunned. These were the original tags he had purchased when first naming his dog after his fallen friend. They had been lost during one of his many moves, before he'd obtained the more professional tags with tracking information that Ranger had worn when surrendered to the shelter. The significance struck Caleb with sudden clarity. Raymond must have found these tags at some point. Perhaps they had fallen from Ranger's collar during a visit, or been discovered in the basement apartment. Instead of returning them immediately, Raymond had kept them, perhaps sensing their importance might transcend their practical purpose. With trembling hands, Caleb slipped the pouch into his pocket just as Sarah approached the truck, concern evident on her face. "Is everything okay?" she asked, looking between Caleb and Storm. "What happened?" Caleb hesitated, uncertain how to explain the dog's behavior or the emotional significance of the recovered tags. "Storm was just checking something," he finally said. "He's okay now." Sarah seemed unconvinced but didn't press further. Together, they returned to the graveside to join the remaining mourners for final condolences before heading back to the house for the reception the church women's group had organized. Throughout the afternoon, as people filled the house with casseroles and memories, Storm maintained close proximity to both Sarah and Caleb, moving between them as if ensuring neither was left alone for too long. The dog's behavior drew numerous comments from visitors, many noting how Storm seemed to be caring for the grieving humans rather than focusing on his own loss. "Raymond always said that dog was special," Mrs. Patterson remarked, watching Storm guide an elderly visitor carefully around a footstool. "Now I see what he meant." As evening approached and the last visitors departed, Sarah and Caleb found themselves alone in the kitchen, the house suddenly quiet after hours of sympathetic conversation and shared remembrances. "I don't know what to do now," Sarah admitted, leaning against the counter with exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "All these months, there was always the next treatment, the next decision, the next crisis to manage. Now we honor his wishes," Caleb said simply. "We take care of each other, and we take care of Storm." Sarah nodded, managing a small smile. "One day at a time, right? Isn't that what they say?" "That's exactly what they say." Caleb began gathering dishes from the countertop. "And right now, this day says we both need rest." Later that night, after Sarah had retired to the guest room, Caleb sat alone on the porch steps, the recovered dog tags in his palm. Storm lay beside him, head on paws, watching with attentive eyes. How did he know to keep these? Caleb wondered aloud, turning the tags to catch the moonlight. "And how did you know where they were?" Storm offered no answer beyond a soft exhale that sounded almost like a sigh. "He saved us both, didn't he?" Caleb continued, scratching behind Storm's ears. "In different ways, but just as completely." The dog pressed against his side in silent agreement, and together they sat in the peaceful Virginia night, mourning what was lost while acknowledging what remained, a connection forged through one man's compassion and one dog's unwavering loyalty, creating a bridge neither could have anticipated, but both now recognized as essential to their survival. As September waned, however, that bridge faced an unexpected test. 3 days after the funeral, while Sarah was meeting with Raymond's attorney about estate matters, Caleb returned from a grocery run to find Storm missing from the house. At first he assumed Sarah had taken the dog for a walk, but a quick text exchange confirmed she had left Storm at home. Increasingly concerned, Caleb searched the property, checking Storm's favorite spots in the garden and yard without success. "Storm!" he called, moving toward the wooded area behind the property. "Ranger!" When no familiar bark answered his calls, Caleb's concern deepened to alarm. Storm had never wandered away before. His training and temperament made such behavior highly unusual. After a more thorough search of the neighborhood yielded nothing, Caleb called Sarah. "He's gone," he reported, trying to keep panic from his voice. "I've looked everywhere. No sign of him." "I'm on my way," Sarah replied immediately. "I'll call Thomas to organize a search party." By evening, a dozen Millfield residents were combing the area, calling Storm's name and checking locations he might have visited with Raymond. The search expanded to the park by the old mill, the cemetery where Raymond was buried, and even the school where he had served as principal for decades. As darkness fell without any sign of the German shepherd, Caleb found himself standing in Raymond's sunroom, staring at the empty hospital bed that still occupied the center of the space. They hadn't yet had the emotional energy to dismantle it, and now it stood as a stark reminder of both Raymond's absence and Storm's unexplained disappearance. "We should check the shelter," Sarah suggested, joining him with red-rimmed eyes. "Maybe someone found him and took him there." Caleb nodded mechanically, though a deeper fear was taking root, that Storm, bound so closely to Raymond, had somehow departed as well, whether through accident, deliberate wandering and grief, or something more intentional. The shelter yielded no results, nor did calls to neighboring veterinary clinics and animal control officers. As midnight approached, the search party reluctantly disbanded with promises to resume at first light. "He'll come back," Sarah said with forced optimism as she and Caleb sat at the kitchen table, untouched mugs of tea growing cold before them. "He has to." Caleb wanted to share her confidence, but couldn't shake the hollow feeling expanding in his chest. What if he doesn't? What if losing Raymond was too much for him? The question hung between them, giving voice to the fear neither wanted to acknowledge, that grief could claim Storm just as surely as illness had claimed Raymond. "Then we keep searching," Sarah said firmly, reaching across the table to grasp Caleb's hand. "We don't give up on family." The unexpected declaration, echoing Raymond's own sentiments, caught Caleb off guard. In the midst of their shared worry, something shifted between them, the tentative alliance of caregivers evolving into something more substantial, a connection forged through mutual loss and concern. "Get some rest," Caleb finally suggested. "I'll take first watch in case he returns during the night." Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand once before releasing it. "Wake me in 4 hours. We'll take shifts." Neither slept much. Caleb maintained his vigil on the porch, occasionally walking the property perimeter, calling Storm's name into the darkness. At dawn, he finally dozed off in the porch chair, exhaustion temporarily overcoming anxiety. He woke to Sarah's hand on his shoulder and the sound of Thomas's truck in the driveway. "Any sign?" Thomas asked as he approached, expression grim. Caleb shook his head, rolling stiff shoulders as he stood. "Nothing. I've organized a wider search. Got about 20 people meeting at the community center in an hour." Thomas handed Caleb a flyer with Storm's picture and contact information. "We'll find him, son." The day passed in a blur of searching, calling, checking, and rechecking locations. By afternoon, Caleb found himself at the cemetery again, standing before Raymond's fresh grave with an inexplicable sense that Storm might have sought connection there. "Where are you, buddy?" he whispered, scanning the peaceful grounds. "Where did you go?" As he turned to leave, Caleb noticed an elderly man watching him from several rows away. Something about the man's stillness and focused attention triggered Caleb's instincts for potential information. "Excuse me, sir," he called, approaching with the flyer extended. "I'm looking for a German shepherd. Have you seen him?" The man, who introduced himself as Walter Jenkins, the cemetery groundskeeper, studied the photograph carefully. "Matter of fact, I did. Yesterday afternoon. Big dog. Moving with purpose, not just wandering." Caleb felt a surge of hope. Which way was he heading? "Toward the old Carter Bridge Road," Walter replied, pointing east. Thought it was odd seeing a dog that size traveling alone, but he seemed to know where he was going. Carter Bridge. The name sent a chill through Caleb. That was where he had stood 3 years earlier, contemplating ending his life before Ranger found him, a detail he had shared only with Raymond during one of their late-night conversations while the older man was undergoing treatment. "Thank you," Caleb said urgently, already moving toward his truck. "Thank you so much." He called Sarah immediately, explaining the sighting and his suspicion about Storm's destination. I'm heading there now. Meet me if you can, but I need to hurry. The drive to Carter Bridge took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The old stone structure spanned a deep ravine where Millfield Creek cut through rocky terrain before widening into more navigable waters downstream. Local teenagers sometimes gathered there in summer to swim in the deeper pools, but September's cooling temperatures had left the area largely deserted. As Caleb parked and hurried toward the bridge, his heart pounded with dread and hope in equal measure. The memory of his own darkest moment at this spot 3 years earlier overlay his present fear for Storm, creating a disorienting sense of time collapsing upon itself. "Storm!" he called, voice echoing across the ravine. "Ranger?" Silence answered him at first, broken only by the sound of rushing water below. Then faintly, he heard it, a whine, followed by a weak bark. "Ranger!" Caleb broke into a run, following the sound to the far side of the bridge where a narrow path descended toward the water. There, on a rocky outcropping halfway down the steep embankment, lay Storm. The German Shepherd was curled in an awkward position, one leg clearly injured, too weak or hurt to climb back up the treacherous slope. "Oh, God," Caleb breathed, carefully navigating the path. "Stay there, buddy. I'm coming." As he approached, Caleb could see Storm was dehydrated and exhausted, likely having been stranded on the ledge for most of the missing period. The dog's eyes, however, brightened with recognition, his tail offering a feeble wag as Caleb reached him. "What were you doing down here?" Caleb murmured, checking the visible injury, a deep laceration on Storm's left hind leg, likely from a fall on the sharp rocks. "Were you looking for me? For where I was?" Storm whined softly, pressing his head against Caleb's hand with evident relief. Getting the injured dog back up the steep embankment posed a significant challenge. Caleb considered carrying him, but feared the unstable footing might lead to both of them falling. As he deliberated, Sarah's voice called from above. "Caleb! Storm?" "Down here," Caleb shouted back. "He's hurt. I need help getting him up." Within minutes, Sarah appeared at the path's edge, Thomas close behind her. Together they fashioned a makeshift harness from Thomas's emergency rope and blanket, carefully securing Storm for the ascent. "Easy, boy," Caleb soothed as they began the careful lift. "We've got you." Storm remained remarkably still during the rescue, his trust in his humans evident despite his pain and exhaustion. When they finally reached level ground, Sarah immediately wrapped the dog in her jacket while Thomas retrieved water from his truck. "What was he doing down there?" Sarah asked, helping Storm drink small amounts from a cupped hand. Caleb hesitated, uncertain how to explain the significance of the location without revealing more of his past than he was prepared to share. I think he was looking for something." "Or someone," Thomas suggested quietly, his experienced eyes taking in Caleb's emotional reaction to the sight. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic passed in tense silence, Storm's head resting on Sarah's lap in the back seat while Caleb drove with careful speed. The preliminary examination revealed dehydration, exhaustion, and the leg laceration, but no life-threatening injuries. "He's a very lucky dog, Dr." Madison concluded after treating the wound and starting IV fluids. "Another day out there, especially if infection had set in, and we might be having a different conversation." "When can we take him home?" Sarah asked, her hand never leaving Storm's fur. "Tomorrow morning, barring complications. We'll keep him overnight for observation and to complete the fluid therapy." As they prepared to leave Storm in the clinic's care, Caleb knelt beside the treatment table where the sedated dog lay breathing steadily. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered fiercely, pressing his forehead briefly against Storm's. "We're a team, remember? We stick together." In the truck, as they drove back toward Raymond's house, their house now, Caleb supposed, Sarah finally asked the question he'd been dreading. "What really happened at that bridge, Caleb? What was Storm looking for?" Caleb gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring at the road ahead. The time for partial truths had passed. If they were to honor Raymond's wish for them to care for each other, genuine trust was essential. 3 years ago, before I had Ranger, I stood on that bridge intending to jump, he said quietly. It was where I hit rock bottom after my second tour, where a patrol officer found me and called in crisis intervention, where my journey with Ranger began. Sarah's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the cab. I told your father about it once, during a particularly rough night of his treatment. I never thought Storm would remember or make the connection, but he did, Sarah finished softly. He went looking for the place that almost took you, just like he lost Dad. Caleb nodded, throat tight with emotion. I think he was trying to protect me the only way he knew how, by keeping watch over the place he associated with my deepest pain. The revelation hung between them, weighty with implications about Storm's intelligence and emotional capacity, about Caleb's past struggles, about the complex bonds that had formed between the three of them through Raymond's intervention. When they reached the house, Sarah broke the silence that had settled during the drive. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply, "for trusting me with that." Caleb nodded, unable to find adequate words for the mixture of vulnerability and relief he felt having shared his darkest moment. "Dad was right about Storm," Sarah continued thoughtfully. "He's not just a pet or a service animal. He's something more." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And I think Dad was right about us too. We do need each other, in ways none of us fully understood until now." As they entered the empty house, its silence emphasizing Storm's absence, Caleb found himself confronting the truth of Raymond's final insights. The unconventional family the older man had envisioned, his daughter, a troubled veteran and a remarkably perceptive German shepherd, had been forged through shared purpose and grief. Now, with Raymond gone, that connection faced its true test. "He'll be home tomorrow," Sarah said, as if reading his thoughts. "And then we'll figure out the rest together." The simple declaration, with its implicit acknowledgement of continued shared responsibility and residence, offered Caleb an unexpected sense of peace amid the tumult of recent days. Perhaps Raymond had seen more clearly than any of them what was needed, not just for Storm's well-being, but for their own healing and future. The empty dog bed in the living room stood as both absence and promise, a temporary void that would be filled again, just as the larger absence left by Raymond's passing might eventually be eased by the connections he had so carefully cultivated before his departure. Storm's return from the veterinary clinic brought a renewed sense of purpose to the house. The German shepherd limped through the front door on 3 legs, his injured limb bandaged and a protective cone encircling his head, an indignity he bore with stoic resignation. Despite his weakened state, he immediately conducted a thorough inspection of the premises, nose working overtime as he checked Raymond's empty sunroom, the kitchen, and finally the porch where the three of them had spent so many evenings together. "He's looking for Dad," Sarah whispered to Caleb as they watched Storm's methodical search. "Should we do something?" Caleb shook his head slightly. "He needs to understand in his own way. Dogs process loss differently than we do, but they do process it." Once Storm completed his inspection, he settled in the sunroom, choosing a patch of morning sunlight near where Raymond's hospital bed had stood. There he remained for most of the day, accepting water and medication, but showing little interest in food or interaction. Dr. Madison said his appetite might be affected by the medication, Sarah reminded Caleb as evening approached with Storm's food bowl still untouched. "But I'm worried it's more than that," Caleb shared her concern. Having nearly lost Storm once, the possibility of the dog succumbing to grief seemed suddenly terribly plausible. That night, he dragged his mattress into the sunroom, unwilling to leave Storm alone in his vulnerable state. To his surprise, Sarah appeared at the doorway with her own blanket and pillow. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I don't think any of us should be alone right now." They created an impromptu camping arrangement on the sunroom floor, Sarah on one side of Storm's bed and Caleb on the other. The German shepherd watched their preparations with mild interest before resting his head on his paws with a deep sigh. "I used to do this with Dad when Mom was in hospice," Sarah said quietly as darkness settled around them. "Sleep on the floor beside his chair because he refused to leave her room. I'd bring homework, he'd bring crossword puzzles, and we'd pretend it was a perfectly normal place to spend the night." Caleb could picture it clearly, a younger Sarah maintaining scholarly discipline even in crisis, Raymond finding solace in orderly word puzzles while his world collapsed around him. "Your father was an extraordinary man." "He was," Sarah agreed. "But it took me until recently to understand just how extraordinary. I always saw his educator side, organized, principled, steady. I never fully appreciated his capacity for unconventional thinking until he brought you and Storm into our lives." The admission hung in the darkness between them, an acknowledgment of the unusual arrangement Raymond had orchestrated and its unexpected benefits for all involved. "Do you think he planned this all along?" Caleb asked. "From the first moment I showed up on his doorstep?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Not initially, no. But I think once he saw the connection between you and Storm, and later between Storm and himself, I think he recognized a solution none of us would have devised independently." In the dim light filtering through the windows, Caleb could just make out Storm's eyes, still open, moving between them as they spoke, as if following the conversation about his role in their lives. "He's listening to us," Caleb observed. "He always seems to understand more than should be possible." "Dad believed that too." Sarah's voice softened. "The night before his first surgery, he told me Storm knew things we couldn't explain, said it was like having a guardian angel with fur." The description brought a smile to Caleb's face, despite the melancholy of their circumstances. "A furry guardian angel who's currently refusing to eat his dinner." As if responding to the gentle challenge, Storm lifted his head slightly, looking toward his untouched food bowl with newfound consideration. "Are you hungry after all, buddy?" Caleb asked, hope threading through his voice. To their mutual relief, Storm rose stiffly from his bed and made his way to the bowl, Cone bumping awkwardly against the floor as he lowered his head to eat. The simple action felt like a victory, a small but significant sign that Storm was choosing to continue, despite his grief. "Good boy," Sarah encouraged, the tears in her voice betraying the emotional weight of the moment. "That's right." Later, as Storm slept between them on the sunroom floor, his breathing finally deep and regular, Sarah whispered into the darkness, "We're going to be okay, aren't we? The three of us?" Caleb stared at the ceiling, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think so," he replied finally. "Not right away, and not without hard days. But eventually." The prediction proved accurate in the weeks that followed. Storm's physical recovery progressed steadily, his leg healing cleanly under Dr. Madison's care. His emotional recovery, however, followed a less linear path. Some days, he seemed almost his old self, alert, engaged, responsive to both Caleb and Sarah. Other days, he would retreat to Raymond's former room, lying for hours on the rug beside the bed, where Eleanor's scent had long faded, but Raymond's remained. October arrived with Virginia's spectacular autumn display, the maple outside Raymond's window blazing with color that cast warm patterns across the sunroom floor. Sarah, who had initially planned to return to Chicago after settling Raymond's affairs, continued extending her leave of absence from the law firm. "They're not happy about it," she admitted to Caleb one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Storm patrol the front yard with increasing mobility. "But I can't leave yet. It doesn't feel right." Caleb understood completely. Though he had returned to work at the construction company, each departure from the house filled him with anxiety that only subsided upon reuniting with Storm, and increasingly with Sarah as well. The three of them had developed routines and rituals that provided structure amid their grief. Morning coffee on the porch, evening walks when Storm's leg permitted, shared meals that had evolved from obligatory sustenance to meaningful connection. "What does feel right?" Caleb asked, the question extending beyond Sarah's immediate career concerns to the larger uncertainties they both faced. Sarah considered thoughtfully, watching Storm inspect the perimeter of Eleanor's garden with methodical precision. "This, in a way I can't entirely explain. Being here." Continuing what Dad started, she glanced at Caleb. "Working through this together." The admission reflected Caleb's own growing sense that their arrangement, initially born of necessity and Raymond's foresight, had evolved into something essential for all three of them. The house that had once been Raymond and Eleanor's had transformed into a space where new connections flourished amid shared grief and purpose. As Halloween approached, bringing Millfield's annual Harvest Festival, Sarah surprised Caleb by suggesting they participate. "Dad always had a booth giving out books instead of candy," she explained. The kids pretended to be disappointed, but his selections were legendary. Some families still have entire shelves of Principal Whitaker Halloween books. "You want to continue the tradition?" Caleb asked, touched by the suggestion. "I think we should." With a twist. Sarah hesitated, then added, "I was thinking we could include information about service dogs, maybe raise some awareness about what Storm means to you, to us." The proposal represented more than a simple community activity. It suggested a future where Sarah's legal expertise, Caleb's experience with PTSD, and Storm's remarkable abilities might combine into something meaningful beyond their private grief. The festival booth proved unexpectedly successful. Children crowded around to meet Storm, now recovered enough to wear a superhero cape instead of a cone, while parents expressed genuine interest in learning about service animals and PTSD support. Sarah distributed books alongside informational pamphlets, while Caleb found himself sharing parts of his story he had previously kept private, discovering unexpected relief in the telling. "You're good at this," Sarah observed as they packed up that evening. "Connecting with people, explaining complex issues simply." "Have you ever thought about working with other veterans?" Caleb shook his head. "I've been focused on my own recovery for so long. The idea of helping others seemed presumptuous." "It's not presumptuous to share what you've learned," Sarah countered, "especially when your experience could help others navigate the same challenges." The suggestion planted a seed that germinated slowly in the weeks that followed. November brought colder temperatures and the approach of Thanksgiving, a holiday that loomed with both traditional significance and the painful awareness of Raymond's absence at the table. "We should do something special," Sarah proposed one evening. "Not ignore the day, but not try to recreate past Thanksgivings either." "What did you have in mind?" Caleb asked, looking up from the VA paperwork he'd been completing, a task that had become significantly less daunting with Sarah's legal expertise to guide him. "Thomas mentioned that the community center hosts a dinner for people who don't have family gatherings, veterans, elderly residents, people new to town." Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "I thought maybe we could volunteer, bring Storm. Make it about giving rather than what we're missing." The suggestion reflected how far they had both come from the initial days of loss, finding purpose in connection rather than isolation, creating new traditions rather than mourning broken ones. Thanksgiving Day found them at the Millfield Community Center, Storm wearing his therapy dog vest, recently obtained through a certification program Sarah had researched, moving among the tables with gentle dignity. Caleb served food alongside several other veterans, while Sarah coordinated seating arrangements, ensuring no one dined alone. Raymond would be proud, Thomas commented, joining them during a quiet moment. This is exactly the kind of community involvement he valued. The observation warmed Caleb unexpectedly. Throughout his life, earning approval had rarely been a priority. Survival and later recovery had consumed his focus. The idea that he might be continuing Raymond's legacy, honoring the man who had given him a second chance, provided a sense of purpose he had long lacked. That evening, as they returned to the house with Storm drowsy from attention and turkey scraps, Sarah paused in the driveway, looking up at the stars visible in the clear November sky. "I need to make a decision about Chicago," she said abruptly. "The firm has been patient, but they're pressing for a timeline. Either I return after New Year's or they'll need to replace me permanently." Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. Though neither had directly addressed the future of their living arrangement, he had begun to assume a continuity that now seemed suddenly tenuous. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully, maintaining neutral tone despite the spike of anxiety her announcement triggered. Sarah turned to face him, her expression resolute in the porch light. "I'm thinking I don't want to go back. Not to that life, that pace, that isolation." She gestured toward the house. "I'm thinking my father was right. There's something here worth building. Not just a career, but a life. Connections. Purpose." Relief washed through Caleb, followed immediately by concern about the professional sacrifice such a decision represented. "Your career can continue here," Sarah interrupted. "There's a firm in Richmond looking for someone with corporate law experience. It's a partner-track position, less prestigious than Chicago, but more balanced. I had a preliminary interview last week." The revelation that Sarah had been exploring local opportunities suggested a commitment to their arrangement that Caleb had hoped for but hadn't dared assume. "And the house?" he asked, the question encompassing much more than property ownership. "Dad wanted us to share it," Sarah replied simply. "I think we should honor that wish, at least for now. The basement apartment gives you independence. I can take the main floor, and Storm—" She smiled down at the German Shepherd leaning contentedly against her leg. "Storm can continue his current arrangement of going wherever he pleases." The proposed solution maintained the careful boundaries they had established while acknowledging the connection that had formed between them. Neither romantic nor merely convenient, but something unique forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. "I'd like that," Caleb said honestly. "It feels right." They settled into this new understanding with the approaching holiday season, each finding ways to honor Raymond's memory while establishing new traditions. Sarah hung Eleanor's antique ornaments alongside simple decorations Caleb crafted from construction materials, copper pipe stars and cedar wood snowflakes that brought his unexpected artistic talent to light. Storm supervised these activities with dignified interest, his recovery now complete enough that he had resumed his former duties of checking doors and windows each night before settling in whichever room he deemed most in need of his presence. December brought Sarah's official resignation from the Chicago firm and acceptance of the Richmond position, which would begin after the new year. The decision seemed to release something long held within her, a tension Caleb hadn't fully recognized until its absence revealed a more grounded, present version of the driven attorney he had first met. "Dad always said I worked too hard at the wrong things," she admitted one evening as they sorted through Raymond's books, deciding which to donate and which to keep. "I thought he meant I should focus more on family, traditional values. Now I think he meant I was pursuing achievement at the expense of fulfillment." Caleb nodded, understanding the distinction intimately from his own recovery journey. Purpose versus accomplishment. Exactly. Sarah held up a well-worn volume of Thoreau, smiling at her father's extensive margin notes. The irony is that I'm finding more meaningful work possibilities here than I ever did in Chicago. The Richmond firm has a pro bono program for veterans needing legal assistance with VA benefits and housing issues. The synchronicity between Sarah's emerging professional direction and Caleb's experience created yet another strand in the web of connection Raymond had initiated. As Christmas approached, these connections extended further into the community, with invitations and visitors creating a social calendar neither had anticipated. Thomas and his wife included them in a Christmas Eve gathering. Mrs. Patterson brought her famous apple cake for the young people next door. Former students of Raymond's stopped by with holiday wishes and memories to share. Through it all, Storm maintained his position as both protector and social facilitator, his presence creating instant rapport with visitors of all ages. On Christmas morning, Caleb woke to find Storm absent from his usual place at the foot of the bed. Concerned, he made his way upstairs to discover the German Shepherd sitting patiently outside Sarah's closed door, a small wrapped package secured to his collar. "What's this, buddy?" Caleb asked softly, kneeling to examine the tag, which read simply, "To Caleb, from Storm." The door opened before he could investigate further, revealing Sarah in flannel pajamas and slippers. "He woke me at exactly 6 a.m., she explained with a sleepy smile. Apparently he has gifts to deliver. Together they moved to the living room, where a modest tree sparkled with the eclectic combination of Eleanor's heirlooms and Caleb's handcrafted ornaments. Storm positioned himself importantly beside the few wrapped presents beneath the branches, clearly awaiting his moment. "You should open yours first," Sarah suggested, indicating the package attached to Storm's collar. With careful fingers, Caleb untied the small box and removed the wrapping. Inside, nestled on cotton batting, lay a set of dog tags, not the original ones Storm had recovered months earlier, but new ones engraved with both Ranger and Storm on the front, and on the reverse, Guardian of Two Hearts, R.W. "Sarah," Caleb breathed, emotion tightening his throat. "This is—" "Dad ordered them before he died," she explained softly. "Asked me to give them to you at Christmas. Said you'd understand the meaning." Caleb nodded, unable to speak as he traced the engraved letters with his fingertip. Raymond had understood, perhaps better than either of them, the dual identity Storm carried: Ranger, the loyal companion who had saved Caleb's life, and Storm, the steadfast friend who had given Raymond purpose in his final months. The inscription acknowledged the dog's remarkable role in guarding them both through their darkest moments. "I have something for you too," Caleb said once he'd composed himself. He retrieved a flat package from beneath the tree and handed it to Sarah. "It's not as meaningful, but—" "Let me be the judge of that," Sarah interrupted gently, carefully unwrapping the gift. Inside lay a framed photograph Caleb had discovered while organizing Raymond's office. Eleanor and Raymond on their wedding day, young and radiant with possibility, standing beneath the same oak tree where Raymond now rested. Caleb had restored the faded image, carefully removing water damage and enhancing the clarity until it looked nearly new. "Oh," Sarah whispered, fingers tracing the glass over her parents' faces. "I've never seen this before. Mom looks so happy." "There's more," Caleb said, indicating that she should turn the frame over. On the back, Caleb had mounted a second photograph, this one taken by Thomas at Thanksgiving, capturing Sarah, Caleb, and Storm at the community center, all three focused on something outside the frame, expressions open and engaged. The juxtaposition of the two images, past and present, beginning and continuation, created a visual narrative of family extending beyond conventional boundaries. "It's perfect," Sarah said, voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect," Storm, apparently satisfied with the successful exchange of his assigned deliveries, settled contentedly between them as they continued opening the few remaining gifts, practical items and small tokens that reflected their growing understanding of each other's preferences and needs. Later, as they prepared a simple holiday meal together, Caleb found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. 10 months earlier, he had stood on Raymond's porch, desperate and alone, seeking only to reclaim the dog who had saved his life. Now he stood in Raymond's kitchen, their kitchen, part of something he had never imagined possible. "Penny for your thoughts?" Sarah asked, noticing his contemplative expression as she chopped vegetables for the stuffing. "Just thinking about how differently this year could have ended," Caleb admitted. "If Raymond had refused to see me that day, or if you had convinced him to return to Chicago for treatment." Sarah nodded, understanding the cascade of alternate scenarios his mind was tracing. A lot of decision points, each with different possible outcomes. "Raymond chose the hardest path at every turn," Caleb observed. "Hearing me out instead of turning me away, proposing shared custody instead of keeping Storm for himself, inviting me to live here despite the risks, staying here for treatment instead of specialized facilities. That was Dad," Sarah said with a sad smile. "Always taking the harder, more meaningful road. He used to tell his students that the measure of a life wasn't its ease but its impact." The observation resonated with Caleb's military experience, where the most valuable missions were rarely the most comfortable. By that measure, he lived extraordinarily well. "He did," Sarah agreed. "And he'd want us to do the same." The statement carried the weight of both tribute and challenge, to honor Raymond not merely by remembering him, but by continuing the work he had begun in bringing them together, creating connection where isolation might have prevailed. As they carried their modest feast to the dining room table, where Storm had already assumed his position of hopeful observation, Caleb felt something settle within him, not the absence of grief which still surfaced in unexpected moments, but the presence of something equally powerful: purpose, belonging, home. These were gifts Raymond had given them, more lasting than property or possessions. Through his compassion, his insight, and his willingness to take unconventional paths, Raymond had created the conditions for healing none of them could have achieved alone. "To Raymond," Sarah proposed, raising her glass in the first toast. "Who saw possibilities the rest of us missed." "To Raymond," Caleb echoed, clinking his glass against hers, while Storm offered a soft whine of apparent agreement. "And to the family he helped us find." The word family hung in the air between them, unconventional, unexpected, but undeniably accurate. As they shared their meal, occasionally slipping tidbits to Storm despite mutual agreements to maintain better discipline, Caleb recognized that Raymond's final gift had been precisely this: the recognition that family could form beyond blood relations, beyond traditional structures, in the spaces where human and canine hearts recognize their common need for connection. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's dormant garden where spring bulbs waited beneath the soil for their time to emerge. Inside, warmth and conversation flowed between two people who had begun as strangers, brought together by one remarkable dog and one extraordinary man who had seen in both of them possibilities they had not recognized in themselves. Storm, moving between them with contentment evident in every line of his body, seemed to embody the connection Raymond had envisioned. Neither fully Ranger nor entirely Storm, but something unique formed through the love of all who had named and claimed him. The German shepherd, who had once been surrendered to a shelter, now held the center of a home, the heart of a makeshift family, the legacy of a man who understood that sometimes the things we cannot let go become the very things that save us. That evening, As darkness fell and Christmas lights twinkled against the winter sky, Caleb stepped onto the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. Sarah joined him shortly, wrapped in one of Raymond's old cardigans, Storm padding silently behind her. "Do you think he knew?" Caleb asked suddenly. "How all this would unfold?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Not the details, perhaps, but the possibility, yes. Dad always had faith in the connections he created. As if in agreement, Storm moved between them, pressing briefly against each before settling into a watchful position facing the yard, guardian of the home they now shared. "Raymond would be pleased," Caleb said softly, watching the stars emerge above Millfield's quiet streets. "He is pleased," Sarah corrected gently. "Wherever he is, I believe that with absolute certainty." The simple affirmation carried them into the closing days of December and toward the new year that waited beyond, a future none of them had anticipated, forged from loss but flowering into something unexpected and precious. A future where one German shepherd continued to bind together hearts that might otherwise have remained alone, fulfilling the vision of a man who had seen in them all the capacity for healing, for connection, for family in its most essential form. 3 years passed with the gentle rhythm that small-town life afforded. The house on Maple Street evolved from Raymond's home to genuinely theirs, a space where memories of its former owner remained honored while new traditions took root. Eleanor's garden flourished under Caleb's unexpectedly skilled care. Raymond's book collection found new organization in Sarah's methodical hands, and Storm's presence continued to bind them together in ways neither human could fully articulate. The transformation extended beyond the physical space to touch their professional lives as well. Sarah's position with the Richmond firm had expanded to include directing their Veterans Legal Assistance Program, bringing her to the city 3 days each week while allowing her to work remotely for the remainder. Caleb had gradually shifted from construction to a role that better suited his emerging talents and needs, training service dogs for veterans struggling with PTSD, a position created specifically for him at the regional VA center after his volunteer work demonstrated exceptional aptitude. Storm, now approaching 9 years old, had officially become certified as a therapy dog, accompanying Caleb to the VA center and occasionally joining Sarah for court appearances where his calming presence helped anxious clients. The German Shepherd's muzzle had silvered slightly, lending him a distinguished appearance that complemented his naturally dignified bearing, but his energy remained remarkably consistent, his dedication to his humans unwavering. Their arrangement had settled into something neither romantic nor merely practical, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the peculiar intimacy that comes from navigating grief together. They maintained their separate living spaces within the house, yet increasingly found themselves sharing meals, evenings, and the quiet moments that form life's truest substance. To Millfield's more traditional residents, their relationship remained something of a curiosity. To those who knew them well, it represented something both unique and essential. On a warm May morning, Sarah prepared for an important day at the Richmond courthouse, a case involving a veteran facing eviction despite protected status. As she gathered her briefcase and notes, she noticed Storm sitting attentively by the front door rather than in his usual position beside Caleb at the breakfast table. "What's up with him?" she asked, gesturing toward the German Shepherd. "He usually doesn't hover until I'm actually leaving." Caleb glanced up from his coffee, a slight smile crossing his features. "I think he's planning to accompany you today." "But it's not one of his courthouse days," Sarah protested, checking her calendar to confirm. "I didn't schedule him for this case." "Tell that to Storm," Caleb replied with a shrug. "He's been eyeing your briefcase since you brought it downstairs. I think he's made an executive decision." Sarah hesitated, torn between her organized schedule and the dog's apparent insistence. Over the years, they had learned to trust Storm's instincts, which often perceived needs before they became evident to human awareness. If Storm had decided his presence was required today, experience suggested there was likely good reason. "Fine," she conceded, retrieving his therapy vest from the hall closet. "But you'll need to pick us up later. I wasn't planning to bring him, so I've got meetings after court." Caleb nodded, already reaching for his phone to adjust his own schedule. "Not a problem. The training session this afternoon is mostly paperwork anyway. Text me when you're wrapping up." The easy accommodation represented their evolved dynamic, flexible, supportive, prioritizing needs as they arose without unnecessary discussion. As Sarah clipped Storm's therapy identification to his vest, she reflected on how naturally these adjustments now came, a stark contrast to her former rigid Chicago schedule where deviations caused cascading stress. The courthouse was crowded when they arrived, the docket full with the typical assortment of housing disputes, minor criminal matters, and family court proceedings. Storm moved with practiced ease through the security checkpoint, his therapy certification earning respectful nods from the guards who had come to recognize him over the past 2 years. Sarah's client, Marcus Jenkins, waited nervously in the corridor outside courtroom 3, his prosthetic leg visible beneath khaki pants, his hands fidgeting with a worn baseball cap. When he spotted Sarah approaching with Storm, visible relief crossed his features. "You brought the dog," he said by way of greeting. "Good. Real good." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised by the response. Though she had mentioned Storm during their consultations, Marcus had never expressed particular interest in the dog's potential presence. "He insisted on coming today," she explained. "Practically packed his own bag." Marcus nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Smart dog? Military?" "Former support animal for a Marine," Sarah confirmed, watching as Storm positioned himself beside Marcus, subtly pressing against the man's prosthetic side. "2 tours in Afghanistan." "Thought so." "Got the look." Marcus cautiously extended his hand, allowing Storm to sniff before gently stroking the dog's head. "Had a unit dog in Iraq. Different breed, same eyes. They know." The simple assessment contained volumes of unspoken understanding. Sarah had witnessed this phenomenon repeatedly. The immediate recognition between veterans and service dogs, a connection that transcended typical human-animal interactions to touch something deeper, something forged in shared understanding of trauma and resilience. As they settled on a bench awaiting their case, Storm positioned himself partly under Marcus's seat, maintaining contact with the veteran's prosthetic leg while remaining unobtrusive. The effect on Marcus was subtle but unmistakable. His breathing slowed, his fidgeting decreased, his responses to Sarah's final case preparation became more focused. "He's good at his job," Marcus observed quietly during a lull in their conversation. Sarah smiled, watching Storm's attentive monitoring of her client. "The best. Though technically this isn't even his job today, he just decided you needed him." Marcus nodded soberly. "He's right about that." When their case was called, Storm accompanied them to the plaintiff's table, settling beside Marcus's chair in the precise position to provide comfort while remaining nearly invisible to the proceedings. The landlord's attorney glanced at the dog with momentary annoyance but made no objection, perhaps recognizing the potential poor optics of challenging a service animal accompanying a disabled veteran. The case itself proceeded efficiently, Sarah's meticulous preparation evident as she presented documentation of Marcus's protected status under the Service Members' Civil Relief Act, medical evidence regarding his ongoing treatment for combat-related injuries, and proof of his application for housing assistance that would resolve the temporary payment issues. Throughout the presentation, Storm remained perfectly still except for occasional gentle pressure against Marcus's leg when the veteran's tension visibly increased, particularly during the landlord's testimony about property maintenance concerns. The dog's subtle interventions helped Marcus maintain composure, preventing the emotional responses that might have undermined their case. When the judge ruled in their favor, granting an additional 60 days with specific payment arrangements, Marcus released a long, slow breath. His hand dropped to Storm's head in a gesture of gratitude that required no words. Outside the courtroom, as Sarah reviewed next steps and follow-up requirements, Marcus finally asked the question she'd been expecting. "How does someone get a dog like him? Not for court stuff," he added quickly. "Just for the other times, the hard times." Sarah smiled, recognizing the significant step this question represented. "Actually, my housemate runs a training program at the VA Center. Service dogs specifically for veterans with PTSD and related challenges. I could make an introduction if you're interested." The relief on Marcus's face confirmed Storm's apparent intuition about this particular case. Beyond legal assistance, this veteran needed the specific form of support only a trained companion could provide. "I'd appreciate that," Marcus said simply, dignity evident in his straightened posture. As promised, Sarah texted Caleb when her meetings concluded, explaining the situation with Marcus and the remarkable impact of Storm's presence. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Bringing application forms with me. Storm knows best." The drive home from Richmond occurred in comfortable silence. Storm drowsing in the back seat after his day of careful work, Caleb and Sarah occasionally exchanging observations about their respective days. As they passed the turnoff for the cemetery where Raymond and Eleanor rested, Sarah found herself reflecting on the path that had brought them to this moment. "It's May 17th, she said suddenly, the date's significance washing over her. 3 years exactly. Caleb nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "I remembered this morning, thought we might visit tomorrow, bring some of those blue irises from the garden. They're blooming right where he planted them." The simple acknowledgment of Raymond's passing contained neither the sharp anguish of fresh grief nor the artificial brightness of forced moving on. Instead, it held the quiet recognition that belongs to loss properly honored, pain transformed into gratitude without diminishing either emotion's validity. "He would have loved today," Sarah said softly. "Storm helping a veteran in court, you bringing program applications, all of us working together the way he imagined." "He saw it before we could," Caleb agreed. The possibilities. As they turned onto Maple Street, the house came into view, white clapboard glowing in the late afternoon sun, Eleanor's garden vibrant with spring color, the porch where they still gathered most evenings visible from the road. It looked both exactly as it had when Raymond lived there and entirely transformed, a visual representation of continuity amid evolution. Storm roused himself as they parked, immediately alert to the familiar surroundings. Despite his earlier fatigue, he conducted his usual property inspection upon arrival, circling the yard's perimeter before joining them on the porch with an air of satisfaction at finding everything in order. "Good work today, buddy," Caleb told him, kneeling to remove the therapy vest that signaled professional duties, above and beyond. Storm accepted the praise with dignified appreciation, pressing briefly against Caleb's hand before moving to Sarah for similar acknowledgement. The routine completed, he settled on the porch steps in his self-appointed sentinel position, surveying the quiet street with attentive interest. "I received a letter today," Sarah said as they settled into the twin Adirondack chairs Raymond had built decades earlier. "From Amy Harrington, well, Amy Coleman now, Caleb's ex-wife." Caleb's surprise was evident. "Amy? What did she want?" "To thank us, actually. She's working as a counselor for military families now. Said her experience with you, both the difficult parts and seeing your recovery, inspired her career change." Sarah extracted the letter from her bag, handing it to Caleb. "She mentioned hearing about our work with service dogs and veterans' legal issues. Wondered if we might consider presenting at a conference she's organizing." Caleb read the letter carefully, his expression thoughtful. 3 years ago, this would have seemed impossible, he said finally, that something good could come from that painful period. That Amy and I could both find purpose in different aspects of the same issue. That's how healing works, I think, Sarah observed. Not erasing the pain, but transforming it into something meaningful. The insight applied equally to their own journeys. Sarah's grief for her father channeled into advocacy for vulnerable clients. Caleb's combat trauma redirected toward helping others navigate similar challenges, even Storm's displacement becoming the catalyst for connecting hearts that might otherwise have remained isolated. Raymond understood that, Caleb said, folding the letter carefully. It's why he fought so hard to keep Storm, then worked equally hard to ensure we could share him. He saw how the pain and the healing were connected. Sarah nodded, watching as Storm's ears perked toward something down the street, probably Mrs. Patterson's cat, a frequent object of his restrained interest. Do you think we should accept? Present at Amy's conference? I think we should consider it, Caleb replied, his measured response reflecting the thoughtful approach he now brought to most decisions. Our work could help others, and Raymond would have appreciated the educational component. The potential collaboration represented yet another unexpected outgrowth of their shared journey, connections forming beyond Millfield, beyond their immediate circle, extending Raymond's legacy in ways none of them could have anticipated when a desperate veteran first appeared on a retired principal's doorstep seeking his surrendered dog. As twilight descended, their conversation shifted to immediate plans, dinner options, Storm's upcoming veterinary appointment, a weekend project to repair the garden shed. The easy domestic exchange flowed naturally between them, two individuals who had forged a partnership neither had sought but both now treasured. Later that evening, as Sarah reviewed case notes in the living room and Caleb worked on training plans at the dining table, Storm divided his attention between them, occasionally rising to check one or the other before resettling in his strategic middle position. The German Shepherd's ongoing commitment to maintaining connection between them remained both comforting and occasionally amusing. His deliberate movement of toys from one room to another, his strategic positioning during meals and relaxation, his unfailing inclusion of both humans in all daily rituals. He's still matchmaking, Sarah observed with a smile as Storm dropped a tennis ball precisely halfway between their respective workstations. 3 years and he hasn't given up. Caleb laughed, watching as Storm looked between them with evident expectation. Persistent, isn't he? Raymond would approve. The observation carried no pressure, no awkwardness, just shared recognition of Storm's transparent agenda and the comfortable space they had created that accommodated both connection and independence. Speaking of persistence, Sarah segued, closing her laptop, Emma Thornton at the community center called today. They've received funding for that after-school program we discussed, the one pairing at-risk teenagers with trained shelter dogs. She wanted to know if we'd consider advising on the training protocols. Caleb looked up with interest. That project actually has real potential, helping kids and dogs simultaneously, creating purpose for both. I thought you'd like it. It combines your training expertise with my background in youth education programs. Sarah stretched, releasing the tension of hours spent reviewing legal documents. It would mean committing some weekend time, but I think it could be worthwhile. Definitely worth exploring, Caleb agreed. Let's meet with Emma next week, see what they're envisioning. This pattern had emerged organically over the past 3 years, each bringing potential projects to their shared table, weighing merits and commitments together, gradually building a community involvement that honored Raymond's legacy while reflecting their own evolving interests. The projects varied in scope and focus, but all contained a common thread of connection, bringing together elements that might otherwise remain separate, creating meaning through relationship. As the evening concluded, they moved through familiar routines, Sarah checking doors and windows while Caleb prepared Storm's medication hidden in a small piece of cheese, a joint effort to manage the arthritis that had begun to affect the aging German Shepherd. The coordination required no discussion, each understanding their role in the well-choreographed domestic dance they had developed. "Good night," Sarah said, pausing at the staircase that led to her bedroom. "See you in the morning." "Good night," Caleb echoed from the kitchen doorway. "Storm, you coming?" The German Shepherd looked between them, then deliberately settled on his bed in the living room, the neutral territory between Sarah's upstairs domain and Caleb's basement apartment. This occasional declaration of independence always amused them both. Storm's clear statement that sometimes he preferred his own company to either of theirs. "Apparently he's sleeping in the middle ground tonight," Sarah observed with a smile. "Very diplomatic." "Very Storm," Caleb agreed. Always maintaining balance. As Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, she reflected on the remarkable equilibrium they had achieved. Not the life any of them had envisioned, yet somehow perfectly suited to their collective needs. Raymond's unconventional solution had evolved into something sustainable and meaningful, a family structure defined not by traditional boundaries but by choice, respect, and shared purpose. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for their planned visit to the cemetery. Sarah gathered the irises Caleb had cut from the garden, arranging them simply in a jar they would leave at the gravesite. Storm, recognizing the preparations, positioned himself by the door with the solemn attention he always displayed for cemetery visits. The drive was brief, the cemetery quiet on a Thursday morning with only a groundskeeper visible in the distance. They made their way to the oak tree where Raymond and Eleanor rested, Storm walking between them with dignified restraint, his therapy training evident in his respectful demeanor. The headstone, no longer raw and new, had weathered gracefully into the landscape. Sarah arranged the irises in the built-in vase while Caleb cleared a few leaves from the marble surface. Storm sat precisely between the two graves, his posture alert but peaceful, surveying the cemetery grounds as if maintaining watch. "Hi, Dad," Sarah said simply. "Mom, we brought your favorite flowers." No further words seemed necessary as they stood together in the gentle May sunshine. The 3 years since Raymond's passing having transformed raw grief into something quieter. A presence rather than an absence, a continuation rather than an ending. After several minutes of peaceful silence, Storm suddenly rose and moved a few steps away, attention focused on something approaching from the cemetery entrance. Sarah turned to see a young woman walking tentatively among the headstones, clearly searching for a specific location. Something in her hesitant movement suggested this was a first visit, the uncertainty of someone navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain. Storm watched the woman intently, then looked back at Sarah and Caleb with clear meaning before returning his gaze to the visitor. "I think he's suggesting we might help her," Sarah murmured, recognizing Storm's characteristic alertness to human distress. Caleb nodded, already moving in the young woman's direction. "Excuse me," he called gently. "Are you looking for a particular grave site? We're familiar with the layout here." The woman startled slightly, then offered a grateful smile. "Yes, actually, I'm trying to find Raymond Whitaker's grave. I was told it was under a large oak tree, but there seemed to be several." Sarah felt a jolt of surprise at hearing her father's name from a stranger. That's my father," she said, stepping forward. "We're actually visiting him now. May I ask how you knew him?" "Oh!" The woman's eyes widened. "You must be Sarah. He spoke of you often." She extended her hand. "I'm Jennifer Reyes. I was a student of your father's years ago. He helped me secure a scholarship when my family couldn't afford college applications. I've been overseas with Doctors Without Borders for several years, and I only recently learned of his passing." As they led Jennifer to Raymond's grave, she shared her story. How Raymond had recognized her potential despite troubled high school years. how his intervention had redirected her path toward medical school, how his belief in her had sustained her through challenging rotations in underserved communities. "I always meant to come back and thank him properly," she concluded, laying a small stone on the headstone in a gesture of respect. "To let him know what his faith in me made possible. He would have been so proud of your work," Sarah assured her, deeply moved by this unexpected connection to her father's legacy. This is exactly the kind of impact he valued most. As Jennifer asked permission to have a private moment at the grave, Sarah and Caleb stepped back, Storm accompanying them with one backward glance at the visitor. "How many more are there, do you think?" Caleb asked quietly. "People whose lives he changed, who might still be discovering his influence years later?" "Hundreds, probably," Sarah replied, watching as Jennifer knelt briefly beside the headstone. "Dad never kept track. He just did what he believed was right, one student at a time." The observation captured Raymond's essence, his focus on individual connections rather than grand recognition, his belief in the ripple effects of small, meaningful interventions. It was the same philosophy that had guided his approach to Storm, to Caleb, to ensuring his daughter found purpose beyond career achievement. As they prepared to leave, giving Jennifer privacy for her visit, Storm paused beside Raymond's grave one final time. The German shepherd sat tall, ears alert, eyes fixed on the headstone as if receiving final instructions from his former companion. After a moment he turned to Sarah and Caleb with renewed purpose, moving between them with the gentle insistence that had become his hallmark, connecting, guiding, ensuring no one walked alone. In that simple movement, Sarah recognized the continuity of her father's most essential legacy, not the house they shared or the causes they supported, but the connections they maintained, the bridges they built between isolated hearts. Storm embodied this legacy most perfectly, his canine intuition unerringly identifying where healing could occur through relationship. As they walked back to the car, Storm positioned between them, as always, Sarah found herself filled with profound gratitude for her father's foresight, for Caleb's resilience, for Storm's unwavering devotion. The life they had created together bore Raymond's imprint without being limited by it, honoring his vision while evolving to meet their unique needs and purposes. The German shepherd, who had once been surrendered to a shelter, now formed the heart of an unconventional family, binding together lives that might otherwise have remained separate, creating a home where healing occurred daily in small, significant ways. It wasn't the future any of them had envisioned when Caleb first appeared on Raymond's doorstep, but it had become something essential to them all, a testament to Raymond's belief that sometimes the things we cannot let go become the very things that save us. As they reached the car, Storm paused, looking back toward the oak tree one last time before jumping into the back seat with practiced ease. Sarah met Caleb's gaze over the roof of the vehicle, a moment of wordless understanding passing between them. Acknowledgement of the journey traveled and the path ahead, gratitude for the unexpected family they had formed, and recognition of the remarkable German shepherd who had made it all possible. "Ready to go home?" Caleb asked simply. Sarah nodded, smiling as Storm settled contentedly in the back seat, his mission accomplished for another day. "Yes, let's go home." In the autumn of our lives, when we might feel we've already written our most important chapters, Raymond's story reminds us that our greatest legacy could still be unfolding. Through unexpected connections, a retired principal, a troubled veteran, and one loyal German shepherd, we discover that purpose doesn't diminish with age, but transforms. Raymond's wisdom wasn't in clinging to the past, but in recognizing new possibilities when they appeared on his doorstep. His compassion created a family where none existed before, proving that our capacity to heal others and ourselves never expires. Like Storm checking doors each night, we too can find comfort in meaningful routines while remaining open to life's surprises. When Raymond chose connection over isolation, sharing over possession, and understanding over judgment, he found renewed purpose that extended beyond his own life. His story asks us, what unexpected joy might be waiting on our doorstep? What bridges might we build in our retirement years that could sustain others long after we're gone? We'd love to hear about a time when an unexpected connection changed your life, or how a pet has brought healing to your family. Has someone's belief in you changed your path? Please share your story in the comments below.